So, it all started a long time ago. Turns out, there was a famous blacksmith who lived in these lands. This blacksmith owned a store where he sold his handmade iron weapons and armor. He was always working hard. His weapons were top-notch, real works of art. You could tell he put his heart into every piece. Then one day, he got lucky and sold his weapons to the kingdom of Cairo. That was a big deal. The red flag waved proudly, its gold emblem shining in the sun. It was a symbol of the army's strength and the blacksmith's success. The blacksmith saw the endless war as an incredible chance to raise his status. He knew it was a risky gamble, but the potential reward was too great to ignore. After the war, the blacksmith was awarded the position of a baron. He had proven his worth, and the kingdom recognized his contributions. The blacksmith kneeled, his head bowed in respect. It was a moment of great pride, as he was finally being recognized and accepted into nobility. Turns out, the blacksmith was now the owner of this land. He had come a long way from just making weapons. Turns out, the guy listening to the story was Master Roman's father. Lord Romero Dimitri, the baron, looked forward, his expression unreadable. He seemed to be considering the story he was hearing. One of the men kneeling before Romero Dimitri seemed shocked. Oh my. So the Lord, Hans, standing behind the baron, looked confused. He wondered why Romero Dimitri was listening to a story everyone already knew. A few hours earlier, things had been very different. So he was about to ask something. He seemed confused by what he heard. Roman looked absolutely stunned as he asked if he was really the eldest son of the Dimitri family. He looked like he didn't believe it. Roman asked if this was the kingdom of Cairo, located on the Salamander continent. He also asked if the world he knew, Murim, didn't even exist. It was a lot to take in. Someone answered with a simple yes. The confirmation just made everything even weirder. Hans thought it was weird. Even though Roman wasn't the brightest, this was the first time Hans had seen him so out of it. Some people were hanging around Roman, who was still out of it. Meanwhile, Hans looked at him suspiciously, wondering if Roman was drugged. Someone mentioned that it was a popular thing for rich kids to do these days. It was just a rumor, but it made sense. Another person agreed, saying that it was possible. After all, Roman wasn't exactly known for being the sharpest tool in the shed. Hans spoke to Roman, reminding him that the lady of the Lawrence family, his fiancée, was coming to visit today. He hoped Roman was in a state to receive her. The person added that it was more than possible, given that Master Roman had been rotting away in his room for the past 25 years. Unlike his brothers, the guy had basically become a shut-in. Turns out, he was known as the moron of Dimitri, not exactly a compliment. The servant was saying that the lady of the Lawrence family valued elegance and manners, so preparing beforehand was important. But Roman interrupted, saying that something else was more important than that. Roman demanded that the servant take him to the eldest person of this land. He said the lady was less important than knowing how to live in this current world. Hans was completely confused. He wondered why someone who had lived his entire life here was saying such things, but he sighed, reminding himself that he had to fulfill his duty as a servant. Hans simply replied, "Understood, master." The man paused, wanting to make sure Roman was listening. It was time to reveal what he knew. The old man cleared his throat, ready to speak. He said that was all he knew. A moment of silence followed as Roman absorbed the information. He thanked the man, saying it was a big help. Roman promised he would reward the man later. The old man replied that it was nothing, saying it was an honor to even be able to talk to him. The air crackled with anticipation. Roman Dimitri paused, lost in thought. He seemed to be wrestling with something. Suddenly, a realization hit him. His actual name wasn't Roman Dimitri at all, but Baek Jong-hyuk. He remembered his past life. As a person of Murim, Baek Jong-hyuk had lived a fierce life, fulfilling everything before peacefully accepting his death. But somehow, he woke up in Roman Dimitri's body. He couldn't understand how this had happened. Roman wondered if this was the will of the heavens, or maybe God's punishment for not accepting ascension. He was really confused. The man looked at Roman, clearly confused by what he was saying. Roman just stared back, lost in his own thoughts. Suddenly, a voice echoed, filled with pure rage. "You bastard!" the voice screamed. Kevin had his foot on the guy's face, grinding it into the dirt. "Just die already!" Kevin yelled. The guy collapsed to the ground, not moving. The people nearby just watched, frozen in shock at what they had just witnessed. Blood dripped down Kevin's face, but he didn't seem to care. He just stood there, breathing heavily. The man sneered down at Roman, calling him a filthy brat. He looked absolutely furious. Kevin didn't let up, continuing to beat the guy mercilessly. The victim was taking a serious beating. Hans appeared, watching the beatdown with a strange look on his face. He commented that he was just passing through for a moment. Hans's eyes widened as he looked closer. He noticed a tattoo on the victim's arm and gasped. "Ah," he said, recognizing the tattoo. "That tattoo of fangs is..." Someone nearby asked what the tattoo was. Hans looked nervous, sweating a bit. Someone shouted, calling him master. The voice was full of urgency. Roman turned his head, trying to figure out who was calling him. He looked a little surprised. Hans pointed out that it seemed like the blood fangs were involved. Roman looked confused and asked what the blood fangs were. Hans explained that they were a group that made money by lending it out at crazy high prices, not just in Dimitri, but in other places nearby too. Hans looked worried, saying it seemed like the kid owed the blood fangs a lot of money. He added that they were going too far. Hans was about to say they should pretend they didn't see anything, that getting involved wouldn't be good, but he stopped himself, unsure. Suddenly, a voice echoed with authority. It was a single, powerful word. Stop. The three men froze, their faces etched with confusion and surprise. They all looked up, trying to figure out who had given the order. Someone in the crowd shouted, "Master!" It was clear they recognized the voice and were surprised by it. Roman stood with a serious expression. His eyes narrowed, a clear sign that he wasn't going to let this go. One of the men stepped forward, his face hard. He looked right at Roman and asked if he was really Roman Dimitri. The man grinned, clearly not intimidated. There was a strange confidence in his eyes. The man started laughing like a maniac. He mocked Roman, saying he only stepped up because he was nobility. He kept going, making fun of Roman for even trying to stop them. He said Roman was just saying stuff like "stop it." The man dismissed Roman's authority completely. He said that Sir Dimitri could get lost since this was their business and they didn't need anyone interfering. Hans was getting really worried. He blurted out that they had to leave immediately because the blood fangs were vicious. He even called Roman Master Roman out of respect. Roman wasn't listening to Hans's warnings. Instead, he said he didn't know much about the laws of this place and demanded an explanation. Roman looked absolutely furious. He asked who had broken the law there and what punishment would be fitting for them. Hans looked up, completely stunned. He clearly wasn't expecting Roman to take things so seriously. The man explained that since the boy was in debt and couldn't pay it back on time, he was in the wrong. But the blood fangs didn't have permission to take care of it themselves, so they were also in the wrong. Hans continued, explaining that what was even more important was that they had disrespected Roman, the eldest son of the Dimitri family. He emphasized that disrespecting the eldest son was a crime worth their lives. Hans added that, according to the law of the land, it wouldn't be odd for them to receive capital punishment for what they did. The two men standing before Roman looked nervous, but also defiant. Meanwhile, Hans was sweating bullets, realizing how serious the situation had become. Roman stared down at the blood fangs and asked if they had heard what Hans said. They had broken the law of the land. He raised his hand, holding the stick high. Thus, Roman stared down at the blood fangs with a cold glare. He declared that as the eldest son of Lord Romero Dimitri, he would punish them all, right there and then. The air crackled with anticipation. One of the blood fangs stepped forward, trying to reason with Roman. He admitted that he understood that Roman was a noble who didn't know how the world worked, but he was putting them in a really tight spot. The blood fangs were starting to sweat, realizing they had messed with the wrong person. The blood fangs stood there, flexing their muscles and holding their weapons high. One of them pointed out that they had tattoos of fangs on their arms. Roman's face was calm, but his eyes flashed with anger. That proved it, he thought. The blood fang looked confused, not understanding what Roman was getting at. He asked what Roman was talking about. Roman took a step forward, his foot landing heavily on the ground. He declared that they were all just trash, especially since they dared to talk to the owner of the land like that. Roman shouted that he didn't need to know what they usually did. He was clearly not in the mood to hear their excuses. Roman didn't hesitate. He charged forward, ready to take on the whole gang. One of the blood fangs shouted for the others to attack. They weren't about to let Roman disrespect them like that. The blood fang member swung his knife, ready to cut Roman down. Roman blocked the attack with his arm, stopping the knife just before it could cut him. The blood fang member looked shocked, like he couldn't believe Roman had blocked his attack. Roman didn't hold back. He stabbed one of the blood fangs right in the neck, and blood sprayed everywhere. The blood fang member was in total shock. He stammered, not believing what had just happened. Roman started walking towards the others, the knife dripping blood. They were clearly scared now, not knowing what to expect. Suddenly, Hans yelled out, "Master!" Roman didn't wait. He charged, ready to take them all on. Roman was caught completely off guard. His face was covered in blood, and he looked like he couldn't believe what had just happened. The attacker swung the brutal knife, ready to strike again. At the same time, Hans stared in disbelief, his mouth hanging open. The attacker didn't let up. He kept hitting Roman, each strike landing with a sickening thud. The force of the blows sent shockwaves through the air. As a result, Han's eyes widened even more. It was unbelievable that this was happening. One of the attackers asked if he was really Master Roman. The fight was brutal, and Roman was covered in blood. He remembered what he first saw when he opened his eyes. It wasn't a pretty sight. Turns out, there was a will written by Roman, and multiple drugs scattered on the floor. It looked like a suicide attempt. He also recalled that the Kingdom of Cairo, which was always at war, chose a representative from each household and forced them to serve. He held the document in his hands, feeling the weight of it. What did it all mean? The story went that Roman, the guy who was supposed to represent the family in the army, ended up killing himself because he was too scared. What a loser. It was a pathetic life, alright? But whatever life Roman lived, it was over now. Turns out, the current owner of that body was Baek Jung-hyuk, the leader of the Heavenly Demon sect. That's quite a change. As long as Baek Jung-hyuk had taken over that body, he was gonna live things his way. No more pathetic suicide attempts. He stood there, covered in blood, bodies scattered around him. He wasn't gonna let this new life go to waste. Roman was covered in blood, looking like a total mess. At the same time, someone shouted that he was a monster. A man saw Roman standing there, covered in blood, and screamed, running away as fast as he could. He was clearly terrified. The man gasped, struggling to breathe. He felt like he was choking. The man begged to be let go, his voice cracking. He was desperately trying to pull the hands off his neck. With a final gasp, the man fell to the ground. He was out cold. Roman spoke, declaring that for any group to function right, they needed to respect the law. He was laying down the rules. Even though Roman's sword dripped with blood, he promised he wouldn't kill them. He was showing a little mercy, at least for now. But Roman warned that they'd still pay the price for talking so ruthlessly. The man screamed as Roman's grip tightened. The man dropped to the ground, defeated. He wasn't moving. Roman then announced to everyone that his name was Roman Dmitri. He wanted to make sure they all knew who was in charge now. Roman spoke loud enough for everyone to hear, making it clear that if anyone had a problem with how he handled things, they could come find him. He stood there, covered in blood, the image of someone who wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty. The air around him felt heavy, like a storm was brewing. Roman finished what he was saying, letting everyone know that he was ready for whatever came next. He wasn't backing down from anyone. Suddenly, the name Baek Jung-hyuk appeared, surrounded by streaks of light. It felt like a name that carried a lot of weight. Turns out, Baek Jung-hyuk had climbed to the very top of Muram, and he did it with power that was just insane. The guy looked like he could blast you to bits with a single glare. His eyes glowed with power, and his white hair flowed around him like he was some kind of god. The thing is, hundreds and thousands of martial artists had tried to stand against him. They all thought they had a chance, but they all got massacred. Every single one of them. The ground was covered in bodies, a testament to his power. There was a time when their blood flowed so freely, it formed a river. It was a terrifying sight, to be honest. And because of that, the whole world knew that the Heavenly Demon sect was the real power in Muram. No one could deny it. But now, Roman stared at his hand, covered in blood. He looked annoyed. He thought to himself that he had to go back and forth multiple times just to take care of a few street rats. It was beneath him. Roman yelled for Hans. Hans, startled, responded immediately. Roman told him to call the guards, report what happened, and have them look into it. Hans, clearly surprised by Roman's sudden change in attitude, just said, "Oh, okay." Roman watched as one of the thugs tried to run away, but it was pointless. The street was covered in blood and bodies, a real mess. Roman stared at his brutal hand again, thinking to himself that this body was really useless. It didn't have much ki, and what little it had flowed horribly. Roman knew he had to hurry up and gather information. He also needed to go through skeletal modification as soon as possible. He muttered the word, "Master." Kevin stammered, thanking Roman for saving him. He then asked if Roman was the one who got beat up. He seemed confused. Roman looked down at Kevin, who was still trying to process everything. Roman made it clear that Kevin shouldn't get the wrong idea. He didn't do it to help him. Roman continued, saying that the Bloodfangs broke the law, and he just punished them for it. And Kevin wasn't an exception either. So he was going to have to explain himself without a single lie. The threat hung in the air, heavy and dark. If he wanted to keep his tongue, he better start talking. Kevin's face was a mess of bruises and cuts. He was clearly terrified, but he knew he had no choice. Kevin, his voice trembling, said he understood. He knew he had to tell Roman everything if he wanted to survive this. Kevin explained that his parents had borrowed money from Bloodfang to buy land for farming. He added that they would have easily been able to pay them back if they had sold their crops. Kevin's voice rose with anger as he spoke about those Bloodfangs. He was clearly about to lose it. Kevin explained that those Bloodfangs had destroyed all of their crops. He looked absolutely devastated. The ground was covered in broken corn stalks, and ruined vegetables. It was a scene of total destruction. He paused, then said he learned something later. It was clear he was about to reveal something important. Kevin's fist clenched as he revealed that those scumbags were after his younger sister. His knuckles were white with anger. Kevin screamed that it wasn't fair, that they never troubled anyone, even though they didn't have much. He begged Roman to save his little sister. He kept begging, tears streaming down his face. He was desperate for Roman to help. Roman stared back at Kevin, his expression unreadable. Kevin thought there was something different about his eyes. Kevin thought he was looking at the mad demon, one of the 4 heavenly kings. Roman's eyes seemed to pierce through him. Roman was thinking about it. He remembered meeting the mad demon in a rundown place, just like this. The memory seemed to stir something within him. Roman looked at the injured man and asked him what his name was. He needed to know who he was dealing with. The injured man, looking up at Roman, told him that his name was Kevin. He was hoping Roman would believe him. Roman told Kevin that he'd check if he was telling the truth later. He added that what happened today would be properly taken care of, one way or another. Kevin, tears still in his eyes, thanked Roman over and over. He was so grateful for the help. Roman closed his eyes, a strange feeling washing over him. It was just a feeling, but something told him this was the start of something big. The feeling grew stronger. Something told him that he might have a long relationship with Kevin. The carriage wheels crunched on the dirt road, carrying them further on their journey. The rhythmic sound filled the air. The driver looked back at the carriage and announced to Lady Flora that they would be at the land of the Dimitri family shortly. They were almost there. Lady Flora, gazing out the window, simply replied that she understood. The Dimitri family was about to get a whole lot more interesting. Someone was thinking about the future, planning to meet him soon. Lady Flora thought about Roman Dimitri. It all started a month ago. Someone was shocked by something. Turns out, someone had just learned about an arranged marriage with the Dimitri family, and they were not happy about it. Lady Flora pointed out that their land wasn't doing so well. To fix the disaster, there was apparently only one way. She was saying that the only way to overcome the disaster was. Lady Flora looked absolutely shocked. Her marriage had been decided just like that, and it was with the Dimitri family. She was going to have to spend the rest of her life like this. Lady Flora was absolutely horrified. She couldn't believe she was being forced to marry into the Dimitri family, a family full of minors. The man tried to calm her down, calling her name, but Flora was too shocked to listen. The man apologized, clearly feeling guilty about the situation. He explained that it wasn't his fault. It was his pathetic father who had made the decision. Meanwhile, Lady Flora's carriage came to a stop. A voice announced, "Miss, we are here." Lady Flora was complaining that she was supposed to marry the second son, who had a bright future ahead of him. She stepped out of the carriage, taking the hand of the attendant. She continued, saying that even that was ruined. She looked like she was about to explode with anger. She said it all went wrong when the eldest son, Roman Dimitri, got involved. Roman looked back, clearly confused by what he was hearing. He cocked his head to the side, trying to understand. Her voice echoed with rage as she accused Roman of forcing her to marry him instead. She was making a real scene. The nerve of that guy. She was going on about how she was forced to marry. Apparently, she'd heard that Roman Dimitri was nothing but a moron who only cared about luxury and having fun. She griped about how much perfume he used. She admitted that she knew about the situation with their land, but she was getting more and more upset. She turned to the attendant and said that Roman was really not it. She looked determined. It was clear she was going to tell Roman exactly what she thought of him, right then and there. Lady Flora took a deep breath, ready to say what was on her mind. She started speaking, addressing Sir Dimitri. Lady Flora was serious as she finished what she had to say. She wanted Roman to forget about this marriage. Roman didn't even let her finish before he responded. He said he was fine with it. Lady Flora looked completely surprised by his quick agreement. She didn't expect that at all. Roman explained that he'd heard about the marriage too. He added that the moron of the Dimitris wouldn't dare marry someone like her, so he believed it was right to cancel it. Lady Flora was completely thrown off by Roman's reaction. She couldn't believe he was agreeing so easily. She wondered what was up with him and if he was being serious. Since this was an important matter, Lady Flora said she was going to go tell her father immediately, but Roman told her to wait a second, stopping her from leaving. Roman asked if there was a problem. He pointed out that he'd heard she really wanted this marriage. Roman was willing to cancel the marriage without any conditions, so he was a bit confused. He then asked Lady Flora if she even wanted to marry him. Lady Flora hesitated for a moment. She finally admitted that she didn't really want to. Roman figured they should just stop causing each other any more trouble. Roman continued, saying they both agreed to cancel the marriage, and that was all there was to it. He added that he'd be taking full responsibility for breaking the engagement. Roman figured that, since he was already called the moron of the Dimitris. Roman finished by saying it wasn't that big of a deal to also be called a divorced man. Lady Flora was thinking to herself, wondering what was up with Roman. She was completely baffled by his attitude. Roman turned and headed for the door, leaving Lady Flora standing there, speechless. The air in the room was thick with unspoken questions. The door swung shut behind him with a soft click. It was like the end of a chapter. Lady Flora was trying to make sense of what just happened. She wondered to herself if Roman was really the moron everyone said he was. The doors to the room slammed shut. The sound echoed in the hallway. A voice boomed from somewhere, yelling about what Roman had just said. The person sounded absolutely shocked that he would even think of canceling the marriage. The man in red robes was saying that he already told the lady of the Lawrence family. He had already informed her of Roman's decision. The man's face turned red, and he yelled that Roman was a stupid brat. He looked absolutely furious. He spat out the words, reminding Roman that everyone called him the moron of the Dimitris. The man, who I now realize must be Roman's father, Romero Dimitri, was ranting about how he tried to provide a good environment for him. He said that a marriage with the Lawrence family was the best way for the Dimitri family to gain a proper position as nobility. Romero Dimitri went on, saying all Roman had to do was get married to that pretty noble woman that he wanted, but he couldn't even do that. He was clearly disappointed. Roman offered his apologies. He didn't seem too sincere about it, though, and immediately, something came flying at him. It hit Roman square in the face. He looked like he was gonna cry. Romero Dimitri was yelling, asking if Roman thought an apology could fix what he'd done. He said that if everything had gone smoothly, he was planning to prevent Roman from being drafted. Now, Roman had to go to the battlefield in 6 months. He demanded to know if Roman had anything to say about it. Roman simply replied that he didn't. The man leaned in, a smirk playing on his lips. He said he'd heard Roman had some trouble with Bloodfang, but he didn't believe Roman could have handled them himself. Someone probably helped him, he said. Romero Dimitri leaned back in his chair, pointing a finger. The problem, he said, was that even he couldn't do anything about Bloodfang. And since Roman couldn't fulfill his duty as a son, he was now responsible for his own problems. Because of that, he wasn't going to give Roman any help. Romero Dimitri turned away, sneering. He figured Roman was probably going to start begging for mercy while crying. Meanwhile, Roman stood silently, listening to every word. Roman stood there, his expression unreadable as he stared at the closed door. He didn't seem fazed by the challenge at all. And then, Roman simply said he understood. He didn't argue. He didn't plead, just accepted it. Roman declared that he would deal with it himself. Roman continued, explaining that since it was caused by his actions, he believed he should be the one to take care of it. Roman told Romero he would come back after taking care of everything. But before Romero could respond, Roman turned to leave. Romero, looking surprised, suddenly told Roman to wait. But Roman didn't stop. He turned and walked out, the door clicking shut behind him. Roman wiped the blood from his face, trying to clean himself up. He didn't seem to care about the fight he had just been in. Suddenly, a voice echoed in the room, cutting through the silence. Someone was asking if he was actually insane. Roman paid no attention to the question and continued wiping the blood from his face. He looked completely unfazed. Lady Flora was standing there, looking at Roman with a mix of shock and disbelief. She asked him why he was still there. Lady Flora warned him that they were dealing with the Bloodfang, a group that even terrorized nobles. She was clearly worried about the situation. Lady Flora looked worried, warning Roman that if Bloodfang felt troubled, they would definitely retaliate. She asked him what he was planning to do without his family's help. She seemed genuinely concerned for his well-being. Lady Flora insisted that Roman should just go back and beg the Baron for mercy. She was clearly scared of what Bloodfang might do. She probably thought he was in way over his head. Roman suddenly asked why he should do that. Lady Flora started to explain, but he didn't seem interested in hearing it. He looked like he was ready to double down on whatever he was planning. Roman cut her off, his tone suddenly hard. He just said her name, but it was enough to silence her. Roman told Lady Flora that she really didn't know her place. He was done listening to her. He looked absolutely furious. Roman was clearly taken aback by something. He didn't expect whatever was coming next. He just stood there, mouth open, and asked what was going on. The smell was awful, like something had died in the room. He tried to cover it up with perfume, but it wasn't working. The smell of blood had soaked into his skin, and this outfit felt way too tight. Roman tugged at the collar, looking uncomfortable. Hans just stood there, holding the perfume. He was reminded that this was his first meeting with his fiancée, the Lady of Lawrence. He had to show his respects. It was expected of him. Marriage, huh? He wasn't thrilled about the idea. Roman thought to himself that he's barely getting used to this world, and marriage would only make things harder for him. Roman said they'd be arriving soon. He figured they should wait for them downstairs. He admitted Hans was right about some things, though. Roman thought there was no reason to be disrespectful to the Lady of Lawrence. She hadn't caused him any trouble. He just needed to break this engagement, but he wanted to do it without making her angry. That was the plan anyway. At least, that's what he was hoping to do. But it seemed that Flora, this woman, was starting to understand the situation. She looked a bit worried, actually. But then, Flora's expression hardened. She thought to herself that he never planned to show any respect towards her. That just gave him even less of a reason to show her any respect, he thought. He was getting tired of this. Roman looked directly at her. He told Miss Flora that she was quite an arrogant person, wasn't she? Roman continued, explaining that he understood where she was coming from. She probably didn't consider his circumstances when he brought up breaking the engagement, he said. Roman seemed pretty pleased with himself. He was clearly enjoying this conversation way too much. Roman pointed out that when he said he'd take full responsibility for breaking off the engagement, Flora started to get anxious. Flora tried to come up with a response, stumbling over her words. Roman's eyes narrowed, focusing on Flora. He wasn't going to let her off the hook that easily. Flora finally spoke, telling Roman that he had no right to interfere with her decision. Flora looked down at Roman, standing tall and proud. Roman just stared back up at her, not backing down an inch. He declared that they would go their separate ways from now on and mind their own business. Roman continued, explaining that the reason he said he'd take full responsibility was to prevent any marriage talks that might happen after he broke the engagement. He added that it was also because he didn't want to be involved with Flora anymore. Roman paused, taking a breath. Then, he spoke Flora's name, getting ready to say what he really felt. Flora didn't say a word. She just turned around and walked away, leaving Roman standing there alone. It was over. Roman's voice echoed with finality, declaring that this would be the first and last time they ever met. Someone spoke, their voice laced with concern. They said that the other person was drinking too much. Night had fallen. The mansion loomed in the darkness, a silent witness to the events unfolding within its walls. Someone suggested that they should stop drinking for the day. He sighed, confessing to Lahana that he had used violence against Roman again. He thought back to when they were commoners, admitting that he used to beat Roman up pretty often, and after they became nobles, he promised himself that he wouldn't let his child go through that experience again. Romero Dimitri admitted that thanks to that promise, their other children grew up well. His wife agreed that was true, but then Romero Dimitri wondered, what about Roman? He was the only child who went through the hard times with him. He didn't know how he should treat Roman. His wife told Romero Dimitri not to blame himself too much. She reminded him that they were the only ones who could correct their children's wrong behaviors. She added that the Romero Dimitri she knew wasn't someone who would let his own son stray off in the wrong direction. She insisted that he still had the chance to set things straight. The man wondered if they were talking about Bloodfang. He pointed out that Roman was a prideful kid. He figured Roman probably said he would take care of Bloodfang himself in the heat of the moment. But if they left him like this, who knew what would happen to him? The woman had an idea. She asked why he didn't get Captain Jonathan to help Roman. The man agreed that she was right. He immediately shouted, asking if anybody was there. A moment later, someone answered. He asked if he was called, Master. The man didn't waste any time. He ordered the servant to call Captain Jonathan immediately. Someone was calling out to the young master. The voice called again, this time using his name, Young Master Roman. Hans rushed up to Roman, looking worried. He said it was too dangerous for the young master to be outside like this. Hans reminded Roman that they didn't know when Bloodfang would return for revenge. He admitted that this whole situation was tiring him out. Hans suggested that they head back inside where it was safer. Roman turned to Hans and asked when he thought Bloodfang had gotten so strong. He really wanted to understand where their power came from. Hans admitted that he wasn't too sure about it. He really couldn't say for sure when they got so tough. Someone chimed in, explaining that Bloodfang had started gaining their bad name by mercilessly slaughtering their enemies. They were especially brutal against those who did bad things. The voice continued, stating that infamy gives birth to fear. It was a simple fact, but it carried a lot of weight. The voice concluded that fear increases efficiency in carrying out tasks. Basically, People work better when they're scared. Hans looked worried as he asked if Bloodfang wasn't still dangerous. Roman replied that they were, as long as... Roman finished his thought, saying they could only be a threat if they could make him afraid. The air outside was calm, with the sun shining on the buildings. The sign read, Atelier Restaurant. The restaurant was buzzing with quiet chatter as the server walked over to their table. The air smelled of spices and roasted meat, a welcome change from the tension of the last few days. The server placed the dishes on the table. There were sausages, grilled meats, and some kind of salad with a strange dressing. He announced that the food they ordered had arrived. Hans looked at the spread with wide eyes. Whoa, he exclaimed, clearly impressed by the amount of food. Roman suddenly stood up from the table. He told Hans he could stay here and eat, but he'd be heading out first. The sudden announcement made Hans blink. Hans looked up, completely confused. He asked Roman what he was talking about all of a sudden, not understanding why Roman would leave now. Roman turned to Hans, his expression serious. He told Hans that he would continue the investigation on his own from now on, and that Hans should stay here since it was too dangerous for him. Hans immediately shouted back, denying Roman's order. He wouldn't allow that. Hans stared at Roman, his face set with determination. He wasn't backing down. Hans insisted that even if he was in danger, he could never send Roman off by himself. He wouldn't allow it. Roman looked at Hans, a hint of concern in his eyes. He knew Hans was serious, but he didn't want to put him in harm's way. Roman stared intently at Hans, questioning if he was truly one of his men. Hans, looking a little surprised, quickly confirmed that he was, of course, one of Roman's loyal followers. Roman grabbed Hans's shoulder, telling him to do what he could to help, but not to sacrifice himself meaninglessly. He added that Hans had already done more than enough just by accompanying him this far. Roman declared that he'd be back soon, his voice filled with determination. Hans watched Roman leave, only able to mutter, "Young master." Hans was clearly touched by Roman's words. He admitted to himself that he never expected the young master would say such things to him. Suddenly, a group of people burst into the room, looking shocked and confused. One of them was even holding a rolling pin. "Oh right, what the hell? Now's not the time for this," one of them shouted. Someone realized they needed to warn others about something important. He thought to himself that he needed to let them know about this. Meanwhile, Roman was thinking about Bloodfang. He realized that if there was one thing he had learned about the Bloodfang these past few days, he considered that their strength wasn't really that formidable, but because they operated in small groups, it was very difficult to hunt them down. Roman figured the Bloodfang were probably acting passive because they were afraid of the consequences if they weren't able to kill him properly. It was just a feeling he had as he walked through the town. He knew they were an authority without a figure, a dangerous group to deal with. Roman realized that if he couldn't find them himself, he'd have to get them to come to him. He only needed to make them come to him. So, he strolled around in the streets with Hans on purpose, making sure they were seen. Roman walked down the street, a bad feeling growing in his gut. He figured that Bloodfang probably knew exactly where he was at this point. On top of that, Roman knew that today was the Dmitri Knight's regular training day. He couldn't shake the feeling that everything was happening at once. Because of that training, the amount of security on the streets had been greatly reduced. He realized that this was the exact moment Bloodfang would strike. That meant if they were planning to get revenge on him, now was the time. Roman could feel his blood pumping, and he knew he had to be ready. This was their perfect chance. Roman grinned, ready for whatever they had planned. Right then, Roman heard someone say his name, Roman Dmitri. Suddenly, a guy with a knife jumped out, screaming that this was the revenge of Bloodfang. Roman turned around to see another attacker, repeating that this was the revenge of Bloodfang. Someone shouted, calling for the captain. The captain's face turned serious when he heard the call. Someone shouted, calling for Captain Jonathan. The urgency in the voice was clear. Captain Jonathan was surprised to see Hans. He asked what had brought him here, but Hans was struggling to get the words out. "The young master is..." Captain Jonathan urged him to calm down and explain what was going on. He was worried about what the young master was up to. "The young master is..." "Captain, you have to..." Hans was gasping for air, his face pale. He was clearly terrified and exhausted. Hans finally managed to say that Captain Jonathan had to go find the young master right away. He looked like he was about to pass out from the stress. Suddenly, a voice boomed, warning that young Master Roman was in danger. The urgency in the shout was impossible to ignore. Without warning, a man shouted "Cur" as he stabbed someone with a knife. The sound of the blade sinking in was sickening. His eyes wide with shock, the victim started to say, "This scumbag." He looked absolutely furious. The attacker's hand tightened around the knife, his knuckles white. The weapon was covered in blood. The hand holding the knife trembled slightly, but the grip remained firm. The air was thick with the smell of blood. The man gasped, clutching clutching at his chest as blood bloomed across his shirt. His eyes widened in disbelief as he realized what had just happened. The attacker stared down at the brutal knife in his hand, his expression blank. He didn't seem to feel anything about what he had just done. The attacker stood over the body, the blood pooling on the cobblestones around them. The scene was silent, except for the faint sound of dripping blood. A voice echoed through the alley, filled with disbelief and horror. Someone had just stumbled upon the gruesome scene. Two men hurried into the alley, their faces grim as they took in the sight of the body. They clearly hadn't expected to find this. Two men arrived at the scene, and they looked absolutely shocked. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. One of them said that this wasn't what they had been told to expect. The man with blood staining his shirt grinned. He asked the newcomers what they thought they were doing, his voice calm despite the blood. He taunted them, inviting them to come and get him. He was clearly confident, despite his injuries. He held up the brutal knife, a wide smile spreading across his face. He looked like he was enjoying every second of this. So, Hans, what you're saying is, Hans explained that young Master Roman had gone out to the city without a single guard, so he figured Roman must have gone to fight with Bloodfang. He was sure that was exactly it. The two guards looked at each other, unsure what to make of this. They were clearly trying to figure out if Hans was right. One of the guards burst out laughing. He said that made absolutely no sense. He asked how young Master Roman, the weakest of the weak, could possibly go and fight. Hans insisted that he wasn't lying. Why would he make something like that up? The man in armor said they didn't have time to stand around doing nothing. They needed to move. The system flashed a warning. There was trouble between Roman and Bloodfang. One of the men asked for help to solve Roman's problem. The other man agreed, since the Lord had asked for it as well. The man in armor said this was a pain. He wondered why Roman was running around when he didn't even know how to use a weapon. The soldiers all looked grim. They heard the order to get their weapons ready right away. The soldiers demanded that Hans take them to Roman right now. Hans replied that as long as they were there, no one would dare touch Master Dmitri. The man looked serious, thinking about what Hans had told them. He hoped it was all true. The man couldn't believe what he was hearing. That moron really did it this time. The soldiers came across a gruesome sight. A man lying on the ground, stabbed in the chest. He barely managed to gasp out a weak, "What's this?" Someone demanded to know what was going on. Hans and the attacker locked eyes, both looking absolutely furious. Meanwhile, Roman stood there with a sinister smile, blood dripping from his knife. Hans screamed at the attacker, calling him a total bastard. The attacker yelled that he was going to kill Roman right there. The attacker raised his knife, ready to strike. Roman stood his ground, waiting for the blow to fall. Roman's eyes narrowed, focusing all his attention on the attacker. He wasn't going to let this guy get away with it. There was a wet, tearing sound as Roman's knife found its mark. A strangled cry escaped the attacker's lips. Hans looked absolutely furious, his face red with anger. He screamed at the attacker, calling him a total bastard. Roman stood over the attacker, who was now collapsed on the ground, clutching his wound. Roman stared down at him with cold eyes. The attacker jumped, knife raised high, ready to finish the job. He was putting everything he had into this one last strike. The knife plunged into the victim with a sickening crack sound. It was over. Roman stood over the fallen bodies, his expression grim. He asked if it was just the three of them. The last attacker, clearly terrified, tried to threaten Roman, saying that he wouldn't be safe if he killed them. Roman scoffed, pointing out that he'd already taken out 2 of his buddies. He asked if the guy was just saying whatever he could to save his skin. Roman held up his battered knife, his eyes cold. He warned the attacker to answer his questions wisely, or else the knife went right through the man's hand, pinning him to the ground. He screamed in pain, his face contorted in agony. Roman stared down at the attacker. He looked absolutely furious and ready to end this. Roman demanded to know who was in charge. He wanted to know who had sent these losers after him. Meanwhile, 3 men walked down the street. They were heading towards a building, carrying sacks. Inside a local bar, people were drinking and laughing. The place was packed and full of noise. The bartender was talking to someone when he suddenly stopped. He looked at something with confusion and said, "So then Roman stood at the bar, his back to the bartender. The bar became quiet, like everyone was holding their breath. One of the bar employees started to say something, but stopped. He was clearly shocked by what he saw. The bar employee stepped forward nervously and greeted Roman. "Hello, young master." "Hello." The bar patrons started whispering amongst themselves. "It's Roman? Why did he suddenly come here? Why does he look like that?" Roman stood at the bar and asked the bartender, "What will it be?" "Tear of the Dawn, one from the 20s. The bartender apologized, saying that the bar didn't have anything like that. He asked if he should recommend something else, but Roman just said that was fine. Roman simply told him to get him something strong. Roman explained that he had something to do in the morning, so he was going to need to be a bit drunk, Roman said. The words "dew of the dawn" appeared in the air, almost like a question hanging in the balance. Turns out, it was a pub right in the middle of the street. Apparently, that's where they got their tasks from. Hans asked what the special code was, the one they needed to say to get the tasks. The code phrases floated in the air: tear of the dawn, something strong, and work in the morning. It was important to say all of those phrases, and in the right order too. The bar was crowded, filled with people drinking and talking. It was a normal enough place, but the air felt thick with tension. Suddenly, Hans's voice boomed through the room. He yelled for everyone's attention. At that moment, someone pulled out a knife. The blade gleamed under the dim light, ready to strike. The attacker screamed, "Attack!" and lunged forward. The knife came down fast, aimed right at someone's face. Everyone in the bar started yelling at once. They looked absolutely shocked by what was happening. The attacker plunged the knife deep into the victim's chest. The poor guy slumped onto the bar, blood spreading across his shirt. Someone shouted, calling the attacker, "That bastard!" The tension in the room was getting worse. The crowd erupted, yelling for the attacker to be killed. The bar was turning into a chaotic mess. Others screamed for the guards, hoping someone would come and stop the violence. The sound of panic filled the air. People started running out of the bar, trying to escape the chaos. They were shouting to call the guards as they fled. The attacker's fist slammed into the other man's face with brutal force. At the same time, another attacker grabbed Roman by the throat, trying to choke the life out of him. Roman stood tall, surrounded by the bodies of his attackers. The onlookers were stunned, trying to figure out what had just happened. One of them stammered, wondering what was going on. One of the men watching couldn't believe his eyes. He exclaimed that Roman had taken down 3 of them instantly. He wondered if this was really Roman, because he was way different from what they'd heard. The system explained that the greatest technique in Murim could increase one's strength by simply breathing. The system continued, stating that in a short period of time, the heavenly demon was able to improve Roman's body through martial arts. Roman collapsed to the ground, exhausted. Someone watching the fight thought that Roman was nowhere near his old self. Another one of the attackers realized that Roman was all alone. The attackers closed in on Roman, knives in hand. They yelled that they would beat him with numbers. Despite being surrounded, Roman smirked slightly. He wasn't worried at all. Roman thought to himself that these guys were nothing but nuisances. Someone was struggling to pull themselves up, grabbing onto the edge of something with a grunt. A man looked up, shocked by what he was seeing. He said that someone had made it just in time, narrowly avoiding something bad. The man said he was just about to finish up. He then asked Roman why he was doing this. Roman replied that it was a useless question, since the man was the one who attacked him. Besides, it was just the 2 of them now. Roman stared at the man, his expression unreadable. He admitted that he had something he was curious about, his eyes gleaming. Roman suggested that they have a little chat, his tone hinting at something more than just a friendly conversation. The man's eyes widened, his mouth hanging open slightly. He was clearly shocked by what he was seeing. Another man was lying on the floor, barely conscious. He looked terrified, like he couldn't believe what was happening. Another man lay still on the floor, a knife beside him. It looked like something young Master Roman had done, which was hard to believe. Someone shouted for the captain, their voice filled with panic. The captain asked what was going on. The survivor from the 2nd floor said that young Master Roman had gone to Lawrence. The man looked up, clearly confused by the news. He asked why young Master Roman would go to Lawrence. The reason was simple. Bloodfang's main base was located at Lawrence, which was really bad news. It all started an hour before. Something was definitely about to happen. In Lawrence, the building stood tall against the sky. It was a place where secrets hid in every shadow. Suddenly, someone called out, "Hey, owner!" The interrogator spoke, suggesting they could both benefit from talking things through. The guy looked up, sweat dripping down his face, clearly terrified. The interrogator mentioned that the guy had already lost 2 fingers, but the guy spat back that he should get lost and that he had nothing to say. The prisoner screamed that Roman would pay for this. Bloodfang, he said, would definitely get their revenge. Roman responded that the man should have acted like that in the first place. He admitted he liked people like him. Roman continued, explaining that those who don't talk, even after torture, and aren't afraid of death, usually have the most valuable information. The prisoner insisted it was a waste of time and begged Roman to just kill him. Roman paused, wondering if that was really true. Roman stared at the prisoner, his purple eyes intense. He was thinking about what the guy had just said. Roman figured it was time to test the prisoner. He wanted to see if the man would keep his mouth shut, no matter what he did. Roman produced produced a photo. He said he was going to use it as an example. Roman held up the photo so the prisoner could see it. He wondered what would happen if he said, Roman threatened to find and kill the prisoner's son, the one in the picture. The prisoner's eyes widened in terror. The prisoner denied everything. He insisted he didn't know what Roman was talking about and that the kid wasn't his son. Roman fired back immediately, saying he was full of it because the kid looked exactly like him. The prisoner's teeth were clenched so hard they looked like they might crack. He was absolutely furious. The prisoner exploded with rage. He shouted that it was insane for a noble like Roman to threaten his family. Roman held up the photo of the prisoner's son. He happened to have learned something interesting about Bloodfang recently. The guys in Bloodfang even sacrificed their lives for the sake of getting revenge. Roman continued, explaining that he had found one common thing among those guys. It's that they were heavily in debt to the Bloodfang, and they weren't originally bad people. Roman finished his thought, but they ended up turning into devils. Roman explained that Bloodfang doesn't hesitate when committing crimes just to make people owe them money, and turning the debtor's family into slaves is easy for them. That, he said, was the truth about Bloodfang. The prisoner explained that they push a person to the edge of a cliff, and they hold their family hostage and use them as a threat. He asked if Roman didn't think that was a reasonable guess as to how they operated. The prisoner's face was bruised and swollen. He said that nothing changes even if you know the truth. Roman told him that Bloodfang would definitely get there. He interrupted himself, telling the guy to think about it carefully. He added that the prisoner had to be careful when choosing where to bet his money. Roman stared down at the prisoner. He was serious, he said, when he said he'd kill his son. Roman swore by his name, Roman Dmitri, that he would get revenge. Roman said he would make the soldiers look for him. The picture of the prisoner's son was now broken. He said he would kill him, very slowly and very painfully. Roman's foot came down hard, smashing the picture frame and the image of the prisoner's son beneath it. But before he did that, Roman told him he'd give him another chance. The prisoner's eyes darted around, sweat beading on his forehead. Roman asked if he would rather keep his mouth shut for the sake of Bloodfang and let his son die while suffering, or would he give him the information he needed to properly take care of Bloodfang? Roman's words hung in the air like a threat. The choice was his. Far from the interrogation room, the town of Lawrence was quiet. The only sound was the wind whistling through the buildings. Deep inside a building, an unknown person asked if something was really true, sounding unsure. Another person confirmed that Roman Dmitri himself had defeated an entire division. It was a shocking claim. The men started to panic. If the Dmitri Knights took action, they knew they'd be in serious danger. The man looked furious. He shouted, "Damn it!" He refused to believe what he was hearing. There was no way. The man sitting on the throne couldn't believe Roman was capable of such a feat. He thought Roman was just a weakling. He glared, realizing they had messed up big time. He admitted that they had intended to show everyone how powerful they were by taking out Dmitri. The news was unbelievable. How could someone who couldn't even get in the Royal Swordsmanship Academy defeat an entire division by himself? The leader sat on his throne and asked where Roman was at that moment. He figured that Roman had just left the Dmitri region. He wondered if Roman had gotten information from the morning dew. The leader asked if Roman was all by himself. The other person confirmed that he was. The leader looked absolutely furious. He said that Roman dared to attack their headquarters all by himself, like they were nothing. The leader immediately ordered his forces to gather. He wasn't going to let Roman get away with this. One of the subordinates told the leader that they would kill Roman before the Dmitri Knights could even get there. They had to take care of that arrogant brat. The attacker's eyes burned with rage. He screamed that Roman Dmitri dared to put his hands on Bloodfang, and he would kill him without mercy, hanging his body in the central plaza for all to see. He continued that the infamy of the Bloodfang would be revived. He looked absolutely insane. Meanwhile, far away from the conflict, the Lawrence family's estate stood tall. It was quiet there. Inside the estate, someone was reading a secret message. They wondered what the Barco family was up to and thought they had made their decision. At the same time, others were gathered around a table. They had heard a rumor that the Barcos took out a large sum of loans from the gold bank, and the only reason they would need that much was to prepare for a war. It was only a matter of time until the war happened, so they had to gather their forces faster than the Barcos. The man sat there, quietly thinking. He seemed to be in deep thought, carefully considering his next move. The man sighed, realizing that things had gone too far. He said that he guessed a war was inevitable, never thinking something like this would happen when he received the document from the Barcos. The man with the glasses said that he never thought the central government would take the side of the Barcos. The other man replied that at this rate, they would end up giving up their territory to the Barcos. The man slammed his fist on the table, looking furious. He shouted that they had to keep their territory at all costs. The Lawrence family believed they were only alive thanks to the fertile soil. It was everything to them. They were saying there was a document that proved their ancestors had been in debt to the Barcos, using their territory as collateral. But one of them shouted back, saying there was no way something like that was true. But even the central government probably did something behind their backs. One of the men asked them to please just leave it at that. The atmosphere in the room was tense, as everyone waited to see what would happen next. One of the men said that no matter what happened, they must not give away their territory. He warned that families from all around would come at them like hyenas if that were to happen. Since the Barcos didn't seem to want to compromise with them, they had to resist to the best of their abilities. The man then said that was right, and that was why they had arranged a marriage with the Dimitris. Another man chimed in, agreeing that they had the Dimitris. He added that although they were originally commoners, weren't they one of the wealthiest in the northeastern region? One of the men said that no matter how much the Barcos borrowed, they wouldn't be wealthier than the Dimitris. He seemed pretty confident about it, like he knew something the others didn't. The Lord hoped that was the case. That's why he had sent his only daughter to that idiot in the Dimitri family. After all, the advisor chimed in, saying it was all for the sake of Lawrence. He assured the Lord that he had made the right choice and shouldn't blame himself too much. The Lord simply said, all right. He seemed to accept what the advisor was saying, but there was still a hint of worry in his voice. Meanwhile, Flora looked uneasy. She seemed to be in distress, and a bead of sweat trickled down her face. The gears turned in her head. What should she even tell them? She was clearly struggling to figure out how to break the news. Flora looked down, her face etched with worry. She was clearly starting to feel the weight of what she had done. Flora was pacing back and forth, conflicted. She thought to herself that now that she had broken off the engagement, she couldn't even face her father. But then she shook her head, telling herself that this was her life, and she wasn't going to get sold off to some guy. Still, she worried about her father's plan and the family's future. With newfound resolve, Flora decided she was going to tell him. She steeled herself, ready to face whatever came next. Flora declared that she couldn't marry someone who she didn't have feelings for. She would tell her lord that she couldn't go through with it. Flora's face was a mask of worry as she stood there. In the background, a knight was running towards her, his face etched with panic. Flora's eyes widened slightly, a bead of sweat trickling down her temple. She looked completely confused, unsure of what was happening. The knight finally reached Flora, panting heavily. He managed to sputter out a greeting, addressing her formally. The knight then shouted that it was an emergency. His voice was full of dread. Flora's eyes darted around, her face pale with shock. She was clearly caught off guard by the knight's sudden announcement. The attacker was right outside, banging on the door. He yelled for them to open up, calling them every name in the book. One of the guards shouted back, demanding that they drop their weapons and follow protocol. He warned that young Master Roman was in danger. The guard continued to yell that if anything happened to young Master Roman, he wouldn't forgive them. Below, a group of knights rode up to the scene, ready for a fight. Another guard ran up, shouting to his captain that there was big trouble. He looked completely panicked. The captain asked if it was true, and the guard confirmed that the Lawrence Plaza was a total mess right now. Things were going from bad to worse. Kevin looked absolutely shocked, like he had just realized something terrible. He stammered, not wanting to believe what was happening. The attacker didn't care about their warnings. He shouted that he was going to break down the door, calling them scumbags. The streets were quiet, and the sky was clear above Lawrence. But that peace wasn't going to last for long. People were screaming, asking what the hell was going on, and immediately they looked down and saw a pair of brutal legs hanging from above. The victim looked up, his face covered in blood. He begged for mercy, but it was probably too late. The victim begged the attacker to spare his life, pleading with him, but the attacker didn't seem to care at all, holding him tightly by the hair. It was simple, they thought. Someone was walking up the steps, ready to attack. The attacker thought that the opponent was a moron noble. They were waiting outside the door, ready to strike. Just one person. It wasn't even work, they thought. They were looking at the building, thinking it was going to be easy. They had multiple armed men. The attackers stood together, confident in their numbers. There was no way they could have lost. No. It was impossible, the attacker thought, looking determined. The attacker was starting to realize something wasn't right. It should have been easy. The man's eyes widened in disbelief, his face pale with shock. He was clearly not expecting this. The bodies of his men were scattered around him, lifeless. The man knelt there, staring at the scene of the massacre. He knew it was over. There was no escape, no way out. He thought to himself that he was going to die. He was surrounded by the bodies of his men, the blood soaking into the floor. The man just knelt there, waiting for the end. The attacker started to panic. At this rate, he knew he was gonna die. He could feel it coming. His mind was racing. He was gonna die. He was absolutely sure of it. No way. He didn't want to die. He couldn't die. He refused to die. He repeated it over and over in his head. He was gonna die. He didn't want to die. He was gonna die. He didn't want to die. He didn't want to die. He was gonna... The attacker begged for his life, pleading for Roman to spare him. He stammered, begging Roman to please stop. He begged Roman to at least spare his life, anything to avoid death. Roman didn't even hesitate. He grabbed the attacker by the hair and dragged him along the street. The attacker, now on the ground, weakly pleaded, "Please!" The sound of the blow echoed through the plaza. The attacker cried out, blood splattering on the cobblestones. The crowd watched, whispering amongst themselves. They were clearly shocked by the brutality of the scene. The attacker, desperate to survive, begged for his life. He promised he'd do anything, even become Roman's dog for the rest of his days. Roman looked down at the man with cold eyes. He told him he should have offered to be his dog before he tried to attack. It was too late. He should have thought about the consequences before he showed his fangs. The attacker was down, lying in a pool of his own blood. He was clearly in terrible shape after that last blow. The crowd began to murmur, realizing what was happening. One of them said that the man was the leader of Bloodfang, and he was a real scumbag. Another person chimed in, adding that Bloodfang had even harmed the Dimitris. They used all sorts of dirty tricks to fool people. It turns out they even tried to kill Roman for trying to stop them. That's how low they would stoop. Roman looked out at the crowd, his expression serious. He declared that the crimes of Bloodfang were clear for all to see. Roman declared that he would rip out the evil within them. He looked absolutely furious, and immediately, Roman stepped down hard on the fallen leader of Bloodfang. The man's face was buried in the dirt, unmoving. The people watching were stunned by the display of force. A man and woman gasped, seeing a knight arriving on horseback, shouting that it was the young master. The man could only say, "Ah," his eyes wide with disbelief. He was clearly shocked by what he had just witnessed. All that remained was the blood splattered on the ground. The scene was a brutal reminder of what had just happened. The question hung in the air. Was that really the truth? The answer came quickly and simply, yes. Baron Lawrence explained that they had allowed Roman Dimitri to enter the land. He added it was because Roman was engaged to Miss Flora. The story continued, saying that after about an hour, Roman showed up at the Lawrence Square, dragging a man. And the story concluded that Roman had stated that the man was the leader of Bloodfang, Ben Miles. And then came the bombshell. He had executed him right there, in front of everyone. The news was met with disbelief. Could it really be true that Roman Dimitri had done this? Baron Lawrence looked absolutely stunned. He couldn't believe that Roman had caught the leader of Bloodfang and executed him. The man with the glasses argued that the important thing was that Roman had murdered someone without the Lord's permission. It was a matter that couldn't be ignored. Baron Lawrence cut him off, saying that permission and the timing of it all wasn't what truly mattered. The question hung in the air, thick with disbelief. Had the person who was supposed to marry his daughter really taken care of Bloodfang? Baron Lawrence didn't waste a second. He ordered them to summon Roman Dimitri immediately. Baron Lawrence made it clear he wanted to hear about it from Roman himself. The sound of boots echoed through the halls, getting closer and closer. And then, the door swung open, revealing the person who had been summoned. 3 figures approached, their footsteps echoing in the hall. Leading the way was a man in a simple white shirt, flanked by 2 knights. Captain Jonathan was surprised. It turned out that the Dimitri Knights were involved in the events at Lawrence Plaza. Roman Dimitri stepped forward, greeting Baron Lawrence with a polite nod. Baron Lawrence didn't waste any time with pleasantries. He demanded that Roman get to the point and explain why he came all the way to Lawrence to commit such a violent act. Roman explained that it all started a few days ago. Bloodfang was assaulting an innocent citizen, so he executed them right then and there. And Flora watched the closed door, wondering what was happening behind it. Suddenly, a man called out to Flora, trying to get her attention. "Hey, over here, lady." He asked if the person she brought with her was Roman Dimitri. He demanded to know why Roman was here and why he had gone into his father's office. Flora looked concerned. It seemed like she didn't know what was going on. Someone asked what he was talking about. The question hung in the air, unanswered. Roman explained that he couldn't just leave them alone. So, he went to their main base and killed their leader. Roman said that was the summary of the whole thing. He looked around the table, waiting for a response. Baron Lawrence spoke up, looking mad. He pointed out that Roman didn't have the authority to execute someone in Lawrence. Roman admitted that he knew he was stepping out of line, but he was skeptical if Lawrence would really take care of Bloodfang. Baron Lawrence explained that the leader of Bloodfang wasn't some mysterious figure. The guy was actually pretty popular in Lawrence, known for his crimes, and always getting bailed out. Roman said that's why he took care of him himself this time. He wasn't going to wait around for something to happen. Roman stated bluntly that he didn't trust the Lawrences. He had to do what he thought was right. Baron Lawrence looked absolutely furious. He shouted, asking Roman how he dared say such a thing. Someone yelled out, calling for the young master. It was probably one of the guards, I figured. Roman wiped his face with a handkerchief, looking a bit annoyed. He said he was honestly a bit disappointed that he didn't get any praise. He had to get blood on his hands, because Lawrence was ignoring the problem after all. He paused for a moment before continuing. He wanted to ask Baron Lawrence something. Roman wanted to know if he had really done something wrong. Roman stared at Baron Lawrence. He asked if he knew about Ben Miles. He knew the guy was a criminal, but he didn't realize he was the leader of Bloodfang. At the same time, Lawrence looked nervous. Baron Lawrence said that they wouldn't discuss the case any longer. He added that the situation wouldn't have happened in the first place if he had taken better care of things. Baron Lawrence told Roman that he would reward him later. He then told him that he could leave for now and asked if he understood. The door creaked as it closed, leaving a heavy silence in the room. Back in the meeting room, Baron Lawrence and another man sat at a long table. The atmosphere was tense. One of the subordinates approached Baron Lawrence, looking nervous. Then he started laughing like a maniac, saying, "My lord?" Baron Lawrence was surprised by Roman's power. He realized that Roman Dmitri had truly gotten him. The subordinate told Baron Lawrence that they still couldn't let things slip like this, but the Baron brushed it off, saying that of course they could, since Roman was going to be Flora's husband. He added that you needed insides like those to make great accomplishments. The Baron didn't want to hear it. He couldn't believe that Roman was fit for Flora. He said he was very happy and told them to bring him Flora immediately. He wanted to tell Flora all about it. Away from the building, the sun was setting over a peaceful landscape. The sound of hooves echoed on the stone road. It was the sound of soldiers arriving. One of the men riding with Roman was worried. He asked Roman if he really had to taunt the Baron. He said that they may have gotten away with it, but what if the Baron got angry? Roman replied that the Lawrence family wasn't taking responsibility for what happened. He added that all he did was show them that it was because of their carelessness. The man continued, saying that it looked like the Baron didn't know about the cancellation. He figured the Baron wasn't going to punish his daughter's fiancé. He said the Baron had it all planned out. The man wondered just what had happened. He thought about the person who was in front of him. Roman stared intently, his face grim. He was focused on something far away. At that moment, someone realized that this was not the Roman Dmitri they used to know. This Roman was something else entirely. The voice echoed in his head, introducing himself as Junghyuk Baek. Junghyuk's voice continued, declaring that Roman was the son of the heavenly demon. Roman stared up in disbelief, hearing those words. He continued, questioning if Roman really had what it took to take his place. Junghyuk demanded that Roman prove himself worthy. Starting from the very bottom, he had to survive the trials ahead. At the same time, high above, Junghyuk showed no emotion. He was completely detached. The voice continued, saying that his death meant nothing. Even if all 12 of his children died, he could just make more. Junghyuk's voice echoed in Roman's mind, telling him to remember. Junghyuk continued, emphasizing that the only way to prove himself worthy was to reign over all. Roman found himself kneeling in a dark cave, surrounded by people he didn't recognize. He didn't know what was going to happen next, but he knew it wouldn't be good. Suddenly, Roman was struck hard, blood splattering as he fell to the ground. He hadn't even seen the attack coming. The tormentor stood over Roman, laughing. He said he thought Roman would have something special because he was the son of the heavenly demon, but it turned out he was nothing more than an arrogant little brat. The tormentor loomed over Roman, who was struggling to get up. The air crackled with tension as Roman glared back, anger burning in his eyes. The tormentor didn't waste any time. He punched Roman right in the face, the force of the blow sending Roman's head snapping back. Two observers watched the beating. One of them muttered that Roman was a dumbass. The tormentor continued to beat Roman, not letting up for a second. He thought back to his childhood, to a time when most people were protected by their parents. The tormentor's fist came crashing down. The force of the blow was enough to make anyone's head spin. Roman's head sapped to the side from the impact. He could taste blood, and his vision swam. He was getting beat up pretty bad. He was thrown away in a world where only the strongest reigns. That was the reality of things. Back at the Dmitri estate, the mansion stood tall against the night sky. The place looked peaceful enough. Inside, water splashed in a luxurious bathtub. It was a stark contrast to the beating Roman was taking. Roman let out as he sank deeper into the steaming water. The hot water was nice, but he still felt like something was weighing him down. Roman closed his eyes, feeling the exhaustion creep in. He figured he was getting tired more easily in this new body of his. Roman lay back in the tub, thinking about everything that had happened since he woke up in this world. He had been through a lot, that was for sure. Roman's eyes snapped open, a glint of determination in them. He knew he had to keep moving forward, no matter what. He thought about it and realized most of what he'd been through lately had to do with Bloodfang. To wipe them out, he had to destroy everything in his way. Roman sat in the hot water, thinking about what he had done. He told himself he had no regrets and that he hadn't changed as a person. Roman continued, thinking about how he would slice and torture anyone who got in his way. He would use any means to get rid of those who directed killing intent towards him. That was the life he'd led up until now, Roman thought. He had always been this way. Nothing changes just because he'd become Roman, he thought. He was still the same person inside, but Roman knew it might be dangerous to go out like he did last time. He still hadn't completely figured out how this world worked, and his strength had definitely diminished compared to back then. Roman lay back, thinking about what he should do next. He figured he should think carefully about his next move, since he was now the young master. But just then, someone told him the Lord was calling for him. Roman said he understood, and that he would be there soon. With that, he got out of the bath and headed for the door. He knocked on the door to announce his presence. Inside, one of the men wondered if Roman had really done something. The other man agreed, saying he'd noticed that young Master Roman had changed a lot. In his office, Jonathan sat at his desk, thinking to himself. The other man in the room agreed that Roman had definitely changed, and that he wasn't the same person they used to know. Jonathan continued, saying that Roman was his sore thumb. He was the only one of his sons who didn't have anything impressive about him. Jonathan added that Roman was also the only child that went through the times when he was a commoner. He paused, lost in thought. Suddenly, a voice called out, "Dad." Jonathan held out his hand, offering Roman a piece of candy. Jonathan looked surprised. He didn't expect to see a piece of candy. "What is this?" "Candy." Jonathan looked down at the child. He asked why he had come all the way here just to give him this. He told him to stay away from here since it was dangerous. The child smiled innocently. He explained that Jonathan worked all day, Dad. The child held out the candy. He told Jonathan that was why he wanted to give him a candy. The child looked up at Jonathan with hopeful eyes. He told him to eat that and finish his work quickly so he could come back home. Hans looked absolutely stunned, his eyes wide with disbelief. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Jonathan looked up, his expression full of regret. He wished for Roman to be happy. Jonathan clenched his fist, his voice heavy with guilt. That's why he favored Roman, giving him a lot of allowance so he wouldn't be made fun of for being poor. But he never thought that it would trigger the start of him veering in the wrong direction. Jonathan looked down, his face etched with sadness. A part of him had already given up on Roman. My lord. But after hearing that Roman destroyed Bloodfang, Jonathan was filled with hope once again. He really wanted to believe in his son. There was a knock on the door. One of the men announced, introducing someone. "Father, this is Roman." The man acknowledged that no matter what methods Roman used to defeat Bloodfang, Jonathan told him to come on in. He added that if Roman really accomplished something of his own will, at that moment, a foot stepped inside the room. Jonathan declared that he was prepared to do anything for Roman. Roman thought to himself that his father was trying to make up for being a lacking father. He could see it in his eyes. Jonathan nodded, confirming that he was listening to Roman. He was giving him his full attention. Jonathan asked Roman if he had really taken down Bloodfang all by himself. He looked at Roman with anticipation. Roman glanced at Baron Romero. He knew that the Baron had high hopes for what he was about to say. Jonathan considered telling the truth, but he knew that if he did, his father would see him in a completely new light. He wasn't sure if he was ready for that. Turns out, achievements that are bigger than expected always come back to bite you. Nothing is ever simple. Roman considered backing off right now. He figured he could earn some time for himself to grow stronger. Suddenly, someone called out his name. "Roman?" Jonathan was trying to figure out what to do. Should he tell the truth or should he hide it? He knew that hiding it was the more rational decision. However, something was holding him back. He wasn't sure what to do. The punch landed hard, snapping Roman's head to the side. He could feel the sting spreading across his face. The attacker kept hammering away at Roman, not giving him a chance to breathe. He shouted, asking if that was all Roman had, and told him to keep messing with him. Roman was getting pummeled, taking hit after hit. At the same time, someone reached for a rock, grabbing it with a desperate grip. Another punch slammed into Roman's face, sending shockwaves through his body. He was starting to feel dizzy. Roman managed to grab the attacker's arm, stopping the next punch just inches from his face. He started to say something, but was cut off. The attacker's fist was covered in blood, his eyes glowing red with rage. The ground was painted with crimson. The force of the punch sent the victim flying backwards. He crashed to the ground, landing hard. Desperate, someone grabbed a rock. It was quickly covered in blood. The group of onlookers gasped, terrified by the violence they were witnessing. Roman lay there, barely conscious, as memories flashed through his mind. He remembered that during his childhood, while most kids were protected by their parents, he wasn't. He remembered being tossed aside, alone in a world where only the strongest survived. Roman told his men that if anyone asked who killed their boss, they should tell them that he was someone who once ruled over a similar world. Roman's eyes glowed as he declared that he was the one who crushed their leader's skull. He would show them his superiority. Roman smirked, his eyes gleaming with a strange light. He admitted he was the heavenly demon. His words echoed with absolute confidence. Roman knew he couldn't hide his superiority, even if he wanted to. The castle stood tall against the bright sky. It looked peaceful. Suddenly, the sound of wood cracking echoed through the air. A wooden plank had just been completely destroyed. The sounds of clashing wood filled the training grounds. People were practicing their swordsmanship, their wooden swords meeting with dull thuds. Suddenly, a loud voice boomed across the training grounds. Someone ordered everyone to stop what they were doing. A heavy boot stepped forward, breaking the silence. Everyone waited to see who it was. Suddenly, a voice shouted, ordering everyone to pay their respects to the Lord. Everyone turned their heads, waiting for the arrival of someone important. The anticipation was thick in the air. The crowd started chanting, "We respectfully greet the Lord. We respectfully greet the Lord." Chris looked up, a bit confused by all the commotion. He looked absolutely puzzled. He wondered what was going on. The man turned his head, looking surprised. He wondered why Roman Dmitri was there. Then, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed as someone stepped forward. The sound was very loud. Kevin glanced to the side, waiting to see what was going to happen next. He seemed a little nervous. Someone announced that the swordsmanship duel with the young master Roman was about to start. The crowd grew silent, waiting for what would happen. The man asked if anyone wished to participate and requested them to step forward. He waited patiently for someone to accept the challenge. The crowd was on edge, waiting to see what was coming next. You could feel the tension in the air. Chris looked absolutely stunned. He asked what the hell was going on. Roman stared forward, his face serious. He asked if they were really going to duel with that idiot. An hour earlier, Roman stood in the room with two men. He admitted that it was him. Roman smirked slightly, a hint of a plan forming in his mind. He seemed calm and ready to face whatever was coming next. Romero Dmitri looked at Roman with a serious expression. He asked how Roman had managed to defeat Bloodfang. Roman thought for a second. He needed to answer Romero Dmitri in a way that wouldn't make him suspicious. Roman answered that he had actually been secretly training his swordsmanship. He hoped that Romero Dmitri would buy the story. Romero Dmitri asked why Roman had been hiding his training from him, saying he would have supported him if he'd known. Roman replied that he'd spent too long wandering around on his own and needed to stop being pampered. Roman continued, explaining that he wanted to prove that even he, the so-called idiot of the Dmitri family, could achieve something independently. But he admitted that even so, there was no way he could have taught himself swordsmanship to the point where he could face Bloodfang all alone. Roman explained that Bloodfang was an organization built on illegal loans, threats, and backroom deals. He figured that if he took out their leader, the whole group would fall apart. So, he admitted, he'd baited out Ben Miles, their leader, with fake information and then hid him away. The other man was shocked. He asked if Roman had really baited out the leader of Bloodfang. Romero Dmitri looked concerned. He pointed out that Bloodfang always went after the weaker nobles who couldn't defend themselves. Roman replied that that was exactly why he had used himself as bait. Romero Dmitri was clearly upset. He exclaimed that what Roman had done was way too dangerous. Romero Dmitri continued, explaining that if Bloodfang really wanted revenge, Romero Dmitri stressed that they could have just ignored their leader and killed Roman instead. However, Roman interrupted, explaining that he was sure that a group held together by threats and pressure wouldn't risk their lives to save their leader when they had a chance to regain their freedom. Roman concluded, stating that that's exactly what had happened. Roman stood in the room with Romero Dmitri and Hans. The air felt heavy, like they were about to discuss something important. Romero Dmitri was thinking about Roman's plan. He thought to himself that it took careful decision-making, planning, and the courage to carry it out. Romero Dmitri continued to think about what Roman had done. He was impressed and thought that impressive was an understatement for what was accomplished. He couldn't believe Roman was the one who had done all that. It was hard to imagine the fool of the Dmitri family could have pulled it off. Romero Dmitri looked at Roman. He asked if he could ask him one favor and told him to please go ahead. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the room. room, declaring that he wanted to see Roman's swordsmanship with his own eyes. Romero Dimitri stepped forward, admitting that he wanted to see just how much his son had changed. The voice sounded again, almost desperate, saying he was dying to see just how much Roman had changed. Romero Dimitri looked absolutely shocked by something. He was sweating a bit too. Then the voice spoke again, asking if there were no volunteers. The men standing nearby looked down, avoiding eye contact. Chris was saying that, of course, no one wanted to volunteer. They wouldn't gain anything if they won. And if they lost, they might get kicked out. So why would anyone want to participate in something like that? Chris continued, explaining that there needed to be an expert who could completely subdue the young master. This was important to keep the prestige of the knights and to confirm the young master's skills. Romero Dimitri's voice boomed through the training grounds, warning that if there were no volunteers, he would pick someone himself. The air grew tense at that moment. Romero Dimitri said that he would like to step up himself, but as the captain of the knights, he couldn't unsheath his sword for something like this. Then he added that there was only one person fitting for this. Romero Dimitri spoke the name, Chris. The knights stood at attention, waiting for their next order. The tension in the training grounds was thick enough to cut with a knife. Romero Dimitri's words hung in the air. Chris looked shocked, clearly not expecting to be chosen. He asked, confused, if he had heard right. Everyone knew Chris as the vice captain of the Dimitri Knights. He was a skilled fighter, but he wasn't sure he was up to this. Chris started thinking back. He remembered the first time he had met Roman. It had been just last year. He had been out on patrol after getting a report about some drunk guy causing trouble at a restaurant. It seemed like a simple enough task at the time. The guards rushed in, but they were too late. They started yelling, asking what was going on. The guards were getting really mad now. They yelled, asking if he was kidding them. Roman was furious. He yelled that they were treating someone like trash just because he had touched them a little. Roman didn't stop there. He kept going, asking if they really wanted their restaurant to go out of business as of today. The restaurant staff immediately started apologizing, saying they didn't mean it that way, but Roman didn't want to hear it. He told them to shut up. His face twisted in anger. Roman was losing it. He yelled at the staff, telling them not to talk back to him like that, since they were just lowlifes. He was absolutely furious. Roman kept shouting, telling them to get over there again. One of the staff tried to calm Roman down, stammering that he should chill out, but Roman didn't want to hear it, so he punched the guy, telling him to get over there when he called. Another man stepped in, telling Roman he thought that was enough. He demanded to know who they were and told them to get out of there. The man grabbed Roman's wrist, warning that if he caused any more trouble, even if he was the young master, he would be in trouble. Chris's face stung from the slap. The red marks on his cheek were a clear sign of the force he'd just endured. The knight, absolutely livid, shouted at Chris, demanding how those lowly knights dared to lay their hands on him. He looked absolutely furious. Chris glared back, thinking how he knew from the moment he got slapped in the face. He was starting to realize something. Chris realized that this guy had never trained his entire life. The knight's weakness was becoming obvious. Chris thought that the knight had the strength of an average, no, below average adult man. He was pathetically weak. The thought echoed with a sting of disgust. It was hard to believe what was happening. The knight looked absolutely shocked. He couldn't believe that such a pathetic human being was the son of a lord. Another knight chimed in, admitting he had always considered Roman as trash, someone who would be better off dead. He was clearly not impressed. The knight was furious. He couldn't believe that he was being asked to duel with that same Roman. Are you kidding me? Chris looked absolutely stunned. He'd clearly been caught off guard by all of this. Then he heard his name being called. Chris, come forth. The man insisted that Chris should be the one to duel Roman. He explained that Roman was an expert who had faced Bloodfang all by himself, and it was only right for Chris to step up for a fair match. Chris looked unsure, but he was interrupted as someone called his name. He looked up, clearly not wanting to get involved. Chris nodded, a look of understanding washing over his face. It seemed he had no choice in the matter. The two men stood facing each other on the training ground, swords drawn. The air crackled with tension as the crowd watched in anticipation. Chris's face was set with determination. His green eyes narrowed in concentration. At the same time, Roman stared back, his expression unreadable. Just as the duel was about to begin, Kevin stepped forward. He asked both sides to hold on for a moment, stopping them in their tracks. Kevin paused, letting the tension build. He announced that he had one request to make before the duel could proceed. Chris stepped forward, his expression serious. He replied that he had been taught to treat any duel as a real battle, especially when swords were involved. Chris continued, warning that no matter who his opponent was, he didn't plan on showing them any mercy. He looked absolutely determined. Chris then revealed his request. If they accepted it, he would gladly take up the honor of dueling against the young master. He added that there was no way that idiot had defeated Bloodfang himself. One of the men declared that he was going to teach the other a lesson now that he had the chance. He seemed pretty confident. Meanwhile, Romero Dimitri was having a serious conversation with another man. It was hard to tell what they were talking about, but it didn't seem friendly. Romero Dimitri stood with his arms crossed, watching whatever was happening. He looked like he was thinking hard about something. Then, a sinister smile spread across someone's face. It was the kind of smile that made you think something bad was about to happen. Chris looked absolutely furious. He shouted, asking if the other guy was laughing at him. He looked ready to explode. The force of the blow had left a strange, patterned mark on his face. It looked like the skin itself had been rearranged. Someone commented that it seemed like the young master had accepted the challenge. The air was thick with anticipation. The man with the red beard yelled that both sides should prepare themselves. He looked serious, like he was about to start something big. Someone shouted for everyone to get ready. At the same time, the sound of boots echoed on the stone floor as people shifted into position. The boots were planted firmly on the ground, ready for action. The tension was building. You could practically feel it in the air. Chris looked up at Roman, his expression a mix of worry and doubt, but the young master just smiled back, completely at ease. Chris's eyes narrowed, like he was trying to figure something out. He clearly didn't like what he was seeing. Roman's gaze was steady, a touch of purple shining in his eyes. He seemed ready for anything. And then, the signal. It was time to begin the duel. Chris yelled out to both sides, telling them to get ready. The crowd started to murmur, excited to see what was about to happen. You could hear the sound of boots hitting the ground, both fighters getting ready to throw down. The air was thick with anticipation. Chris stared down at Roman, a serious look on his face. On the other side, Roman just smirked, not showing any sign of nervousness. Chris's eyes narrowed, focusing on Roman's every move. He was determined not to lose, especially not in front of all these people. Roman's purple eyes shone with confidence. He wasn't worried at all, like he already knew how this was gonna end. Roman's purple eyes narrowed, focusing on the upcoming fight. He was ready to see what Chris had to offer. And with that, the signal was given. It was time to begin. The first move was made, the sound of a foot hitting the ground echoing through the area. The fight had officially begun. Chris didn't waste any time. He swung his wooden sword at Roman, trying to catch him off guard, but Roman was ready. He blocked Chris's strike, the sound of wood on wood ringing out. Those watching the fight were getting excited. One of them pointed out that Chris was really fast and was giving it his all. Kevin's eyes widened as he watched the fight unfold. He was definitely surprised by what he was seeing. The two swords met with a loud crash. One of the fighters couldn't believe his attack had been blocked like that. Chris's eye twitched, his mind reeling. Roman had actually blocked his strike? He didn't think that was possible. Chris took a step back, reassessing his opponent. Roman stood his ground, ready for whatever came next. The tension in the air was thick. Chris gripped his sword tightly, his mind racing. He was trying to understand the repulsive force he could feel coming from Roman's hands. Chris continued to analyze Roman's movements. Roman's defensive pose was incredibly stabilized, making Chris wonder if it was just a lucky coincidence. Chris's eyes narrowed, his determination hardening. He thought to himself that even though Roman wasn't how he expected, he would only be satisfied by beating Roman to a pulp. Chris lunged forward, his sword raised high. He was going to beat that guy to a pulp, no matter what it took. The clash of their swords echoed through the training yard. The force of the impact sent sparks flying as they both fought for dominance. Chris's eyes burned with determination, his focus narrowing to the task at hand. He wasn't going to lose this fight. Chris moved with blinding speed, his sword aimed at Roman. The force of their clash sent a shockwave through the air. Roman watched Chris's movements carefully, his expression calm. He wasn't fazed at all. Chris kept pushing forward, his sword constantly attacking, but Roman was able to block all of his attacks. Chris gritted his teeth, his eyes blazing with intensity. This was it. He was going to give it everything he had. Chris swung his sword down with incredible speed, but Roman was ready and ducked just in time, narrowly avoiding the strike. Chris's eyes widened in disbelief. He couldn't believe Roman had dodged that. He was sure he had him. Roman stood tall, watching Chris lose his balance and fall to the ground. The tables had turned, just like that. Roman looked down at Chris, who was sprawled out on the ground, completely defeated. He had won. Chris stared up at Roman, his face pale. He thought to himself that things just got way too dangerous. The crowd couldn't believe what they were seeing. One of the men watching the fight said it was impossible. Another one asked if they were kidding him, because Roman Chris's eyes narrowed, and he thought to himself if this was truly, he wondered if he was finally seeing Roman's real skills. Roman stood there, sword in hand, ready for whatever came next. He wasn't going to back down now. Chris was starting to sweat. From defense to offense, Roman wasn't lacking in any way. He wondered if Roman really did annihilate the Blood Fang all by himself. At this rate, Chris realized he might actually lose. Chris was furious with himself. What the hell was he even thinking about? His opponent was Dimitri's idiot. He had to get his head back in the game. Chris gritted his teeth. He wouldn't lose to Roman in front of all these people. There was no way he was going to let that happen. Roman looked at Chris, a smirk playing on his lips. He thought that was enough of a warm-up. It was time to get serious. Roman raised his sword, ready to attack. This time, he wouldn't hold back. He was going to show them what he was really capable of. Chris looked down at Roman, a determined look on his face. He announced that he would be going first, ready to show off his skills. Chris's eyes widened as he felt the impact. Beads of sweat popped on his forehead, showing how serious he was taking this fight. Chris coughed up blood, the blow catching him completely off guard. He hadn't expected Roman to move so fast. Chris barely managed to raise his weapon in time to block Roman's strike. He was astonished by Roman's speed, exclaiming, "What's with this guy? He's incredibly fast." Roman's foot slammed onto the ground, showing how fast he was moving. He wasn't giving Chris any time to breathe. Roman narrowed his purple eyes, his expression focused. He was ready to go all out. Chris unleashed a flurry of attacks, his sword meeting Roman's in a shower of sparks. The force of each strike echoed through the training area. The crowd watched with wide eyes, amazed by the speed and power of the attacks. They couldn't believe what an impressive chain attack it was. Chris struggled to keep up, barely holding his own while defending against Roman's strikes. He thought to himself, "Damn it." Chris's eyes narrowed with concern. He knew that if this kept up, things would get really dangerous. Chris knew he had to find an opening. He thought to himself that he needed to look for an opportunity to strike back. He was too slow. Roman's sword slammed into him, sending a shockwave through his body. Chris's eyes widened in shock. He thought he should step back, but then he noticed something strange. Roman didn't give him a chance to recover. He pressed his attack, his sword a blur of motion. Chris noticed how Roman's movements were wide and powerful. He realized that there were openings in his attacks. Roman focused, noticing the openings in Chris's defense. He realized there were a lot of gaps in his movements. Chris saw the openings too. He realized there were gaps in Roman's attacks. Chris didn't hesitate. He saw his chance and immediately attacked Roman, hoping to take advantage of the opening. But Roman was ready. He blocked Chris's attack, stopping him cold. Chris's eyes widened as he realized something was wrong. At the same time, Roman smirked, knowing he had tricked Chris into attacking him. Chris thought to himself that Roman had purposely done that to lure him into attacking him, and that Roman had got him. Chris swung his sword, but he was already thinking he was gonna lose. He just couldn't shake the feeling. Meanwhile, Roman was smirking. He knew he had this fight in the bag. Suddenly, a surge of magical energy erupted from the ground. It was intense. At the same time, someone yelled Chris's name, trying to get his attention, and immediately after, another voice shouted for them to stop. Turns out, Chris was activating some kind of skill. The system flashed a notification. 1-star aura. Chris looked absolutely shocked. He couldn't believe what was happening right in front of him. And immediately, a massive explosion erupted from the ground. The force of it shook everything around them. One of the onlookers grabbed Chris by the shoulder, asking him what the hell had just happened. He looked completely baffled. Dimitri was shouting, demanding to know where Roman was. He looked really worried. Turns out, Roman was all right. He let out an of relief. Roman watched the fight below with a piercing gaze. He was absolutely focused on every detail. The impact of their fight was sending energy blasts everywhere. The floor was tearing apart with each strike. Chris and Roman clashed, their swords meeting with incredible force. The air crackled with energy as they fought. Chris looked absolutely stunned. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. The force of the impact sent Chris flying backwards. He was completely helpless in the air. The people watching the fight couldn't believe their eyes. They were completely shocked by the power they were seeing. The crowd was absolutely stunned by what was happening, and immediately, Roman stood over Chris, his sword pointed down. Roman looked down at his opponent with cold eyes. He wasn't going to show any mercy. The question hung in the air. Who was the person that got picked as the new Deputy Knight Commander? The question was met with another question. Did the person not even know? Meanwhile, two men were talking about the new Deputy Knight Commander. He was the commander's apprentice, and seemed pretty young, one of them said. The other man replied that even then, He's a 2-star aura knight. It was quite an achievement. He's a 2-star at that age? The question showed the surprise they felt about his skills. The rumors about the new deputy knight commander were spreading like wildfire. They were saying that he felt mana after only half a year of training, which was unheard of. The man with green hair looked shocked. It only took him 3.5 years before he became a 1-star aura knight. That's insane, he thought. And the rumors didn't stop there. Apparently, his sword skills are incredible too. It was all anyone could talk about. The woman with the green cap looked up, finally interested. Whoa, what's his name? She asked. Whoever it was, he was getting closer. The sound of his footsteps echoed through the halls. Chris was on his knees, panting hard. He was completely worn out after that last blast. Roman looked down at him. It seemed like this was a good place to stop for today, he announced. Chris looked up, his face covered in sweat. Chris. He was trying to catch his breath. It's okay, he said. He looked determined, even after that beating. He said he'd like it if they could go at it once more. Chris stood there, hand raised, ready to strike the wooden plank. He was pushing himself to the limit. Meanwhile, Jonathan was talking about Chris's potential. He said that besides having natural talent, Chris also had the work ethic to go with it. Jonathan paused for a moment, thinking about Chris. Chris, that kid. Jonathan smiled, his eyes sparkling with pride. He said that Chris was a genius. Suddenly, Chris went flying backwards, crashing to the ground. The force of the impact knocked the wind out of him. The two men watched with their mouths open. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. The two men were still stunned. Meanwhile, Roman stood over Chris, his sword pointed down, showing who was the boss. The castle stood tall and strong. It had seen many battles and would see many more. Joe was lying on the ground, beaten. He was trying to catch his breath. Joe asked Jonathan what in the world just happened. The other man added that Jonathan had said that Deputy Knight Commander Chris was his most prized 2-star, or a Knight of Dimitri. Jonathan stammered, trying to explain. Jonathan was completely baffled. He wondered how Chris had gotten so strong in just a month when he'd been nothing but trouble before. He thought that those skills seemed to be rooted within years of training. The situation was unbelievable. There was no way Chris could have grown like this. The man next to Jonathan told him not to be surprised. It seemed that the young lord was a genius at sword skills. Roman stood tall, having just defeated Chris. Roman was thinking. He had a lot to consider. Chris knew how to be aggressive against his opponents, and his focus during battle was pretty sharp too. He should easily be able to take out the Bloodfang gang by himself, they said. I can see why Jonathan is proud of him, someone mentioned. For their standards, he's a pretty skilled warrior. However, for my standards, the worst. Roman watched Chris fall, shaking his head slightly. Even the weakest grunts in the Order of Demons would have been stronger than that, he thought. Roman stared at Chris, who was still lying on the ground. Although he was surprised at the end, something about it caught his attention. Meanwhile, two men stood in a courtyard, laughing to themselves. Ha 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 ha. The men were having a good time, laughing out loud. At the same time, a close-up of Roman showed that he was starting to get interested. Roman's purple eyes narrowed slightly, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. This is interesting, Jonathan exclaimed, calling out to his son. Jonathan was bursting with pride, realizing that his eldest son was a genius at sword skills. The other man spoke to Commander Knight Jonathan, questioning if he was sure about Chris's skills. He admitted that he hadn't been able to recognize Chris's true potential. Jonathan looked to the side, replying that he understood now. Jonathan turned his head towards Chris and called him over. Jonathan was beaming with pride. He said he had never been happier than he was today. He wanted to applaud the fact that Chris had decided to accomplish something for himself. Jonathan continued, saying he needed to make sure Chris got an award fitting for this. He told Chris to tell him if there was anything he wanted. Chris's lips curved into a slight smile. He seemed to be thinking about something. Chris brought up the fact that he was supposed to leave for the battlefield within the next half year, since they broke away from Lawrence. He asked Jonathan if he was trying to keep him from enlisting. Jonathan denied it immediately. Chris said that he would like it if Jonathan would give him the right to select his own men for himself. Jonathan's eyes widened slightly, like something had just occurred to him. He just said, "Oh." Jonathan kept talking, saying that Chris still had more than enough time. He added that Chris just needed to reconcile with someone. Chris looked up, his expression hardening with resolve. He stated that he would go himself. Jonathan's eyes widened in surprise at Chris's sudden declaration. He didn't expect that. Chris stared down, his eyes narrowed with determination. He was ready to face whatever was coming. The response was simple, but it carried a lot of weight. He understood. Jonathan looked up at Chris, a serious expression on his face. He told Chris that he would give him the right to take care of things himself. Jonathan continued, telling Chris that he also had one last thing to ask of him. Jonathan added that as long as Chris kept showing him what he did just now, he had no reason to deny Chris's request. Chris looked to the side, waiting for Jonathan to finish his sentence. He just said, "Then?" The man looked absolutely shocked. his eyes wide with disbelief. He asked if Jonathan wanted him to teach aura to young Master Roman, clearly not expecting that request. The knight standing gave the orders from their lord. The other knight, sitting on the bed, was in complete disbelief. He asked if the knight really thought this wasn't too much to ask of him. The knight remembered the fight. He muttered that he had to use aura against the young master, Roman. And the worst part? He still lost when Roman counterattacked. The knight put his head in his hand, looking defeated. He complained that all he wanted was to hide in a corner, but instead, he was being asked to teach Roman aura. The knight thought that even if he could get his head chopped off for refusing, he still couldn't do it. He muttered, "Chris." The knight looked at the man on the bed with a serious expression. He told him that he would make him an offer. The knight explained that he'd heard something about this from somewhere. He wanted Chris to teach the young master and see what was different about him. If Chris could take care of this one thing, then he would be sure to transfer all of his secrets to Chris. Chris looked absolutely shocked by the offer. Chris jumped up, asking if he was serious. The knight simply answered, yes. If Chris could get it done, he'd give Chris the secret to becoming a 3-star aura knight. Chris realized this was his chance to improve his skills. A man stood silently with his arms crossed, watching everything. He didn't say a word, but his serious expression said it all. Chris was sweating, his face showing a mix of frustration and disbelief. He muttered, "Damn," Chris shouted, demanding that the knight keep his word. He looked absolutely serious. Someone addressed Roman as young master. The man continued, saying that he'd heard Roman had accomplished great things in his match that day. Turns out, rumors were already spreading all over the castle. News travels fast, I guess. The man went on, saying that he knew the deputy knight commander was a 2-star aura knight. He couldn't believe Roman had somehow beaten him. He said that was incredible. Roman looked over at Hans. He asked if Hans knew what aura was. Hans looked confused and admitted that he had no clue himself. He asked if it was the power to use mana. Mana. The word hung in the air, unanswered. Roman was thinking out loud, trying to make sense of it all. Turns out, they call it mana in this place. He was trying to understand the power that Chris had shown him. Chris's power was definitely an eruption of energy. However, their usage of energy was different from them. It was clear as day. Roman was still trying to understand the energy he had just witnessed. He was thinking about what they call aura here, and something about it. The problem was that it was inefficient. He couldn't understand why they were using their energy like that. Roman looked out the window, lost in thought. He just couldn't understand why they were using energy like this. It seemed that the people here would need to learn more about the powers they use. Roman decided he would take a look for himself during training tomorrow. Roman paused, realizing he might have gotten too excited. Shoot, was I too excited? The next day, Roman met Chris outside in the training yard. The morning air was crisp, but the sun was already starting to warm the stone walls around them. Chris looked at Roman with a serious expression. He still had a bandage on his cheek from the other day. Roman stared intently. His purple eyes narrowed slightly. He was ready to learn, and he wasn't going to waste any time. The bandage on Chris's face was a stark reminder of the fight from the previous day. It was a sign that even the strong could be caught off guard. The rough fabric of the bandage was stained slightly with blood. It was a small thing, but it spoke volumes about the kind of training they were about to undertake. Chris was trying to be all nice, but Roman was already annoyed. He thought to himself, this is going to be a pain. Chris, trying to keep things calm, told Roman to take it easy. He said that before they started training, he needed to explain what aura actually was. The word aura appeared in glowing letters. It was time to get into the details. The system defined aura as a subset of mana usage. It was specifically the form that knights used. The system continued, explaining that magicians used mana by storing it in their circlets. It was a different method than the knights used. The mana user channeled the energy, his hands glowing with power. The air crackled around him as he prepared to demonstrate the essence of aura. The system chimed in, explaining that knights stored mana throughout their entire body. It was a key difference from other methods. The system then identified the person known as the forerunner of aura. It was Emperor Alexandro. Emperor Alexandro had a stern look on his face, as if he was judging everyone. His eyes were like daggers. The system continued, explaining that unlike magicians who stored mana in objects, Emperor Alexandro was the first to figure out that storing mana throughout the body could strengthen a person's physical form. It was a revolutionary idea. The diagram showed the flow of mana through the body. It highlighted the pathways where the energy circulated. Aura, he explained, was basically erupting all that stored mana outward. It was like a release of built-up power power. Normally, mana was spread all over the body, like a network of energy. But, he continued, it was possible to get a huge spike in power by focusing and then erupting that mana. It was like a sudden burst of strength. Chris explained that knowing all the history of mana wasn't really important. The thing is, only a few people could even use mana like this anyway. Turns out, only about 1 in 1,000 guys even pick the path of an aura knight, and even fewer, like 1 in 10,000, can become a magician. The most important thing, he said, was figuring out if you even have a connection to mana. If you don't have that, you're already done for. Chris explained that the bare minimum to even call yourself an aura knight is being able to sense mana, and that's where most people fail, he added. Chris then said that it took him about half a year to even sense mana. He said it's not unusual for people to take over a year to even get a feel for it. That's where natural talent comes in, he said. Basically, some people just have it easier than others. Chris looked at Roman and said they should start with trying to sense mana. He asked Roman to explain how he went about it. Roman replied that he would, of course. Chris thought to himself that Roman Dmitri must be full of pride after winning against him. Chris thought that, unfortunately, it wasn't going to be as easy as Roman thought. Chris finished his thought, saying that talent in swordsmanship and talent in mana were two completely different things. The air crackled with a warning. Someone was about to learn a harsh lesson about reality. The voice echoed, declaring that the whole idea behind the training was completely wrong. The voice continued, explaining that he already knew how to sense mana. Roman Dmitri's body glowed with power. He admitted that, thanks to the heavenly demon magician, he had been able to store a small amount of mana. Roman Dmitri realized that only doing what he already knew would lead to failure. Roman Dmitri knew that even if he couldn't understand why others did things a certain way, he needed to learn how they proceeded first. He had to adapt. Chris told Roman to focus on the rhythm of his breathing, and concentrate. He explained that it was important to feel everything that was in contact with his body. Chris continued, explaining that once Roman got used to utilizing mana, that's when he'd be able to manifest aura. He told him to try to focus the mana spread throughout his body into a single point, because that's how you manifest aura. He heard that once you succeeded in manifesting aura, it meant that you'd become a 1-star aura knight. It was a huge step. There were many ways to utilize the manifestation of aura. You could apply it to your blade to increase its potency, which was a common trick. Chris explained that aura could also be applied directly to the body. He was trying to give Roman a full picture of what he needed to learn. He added that doing so would grant a short burst of power. He wanted to make sure Roman understood the potential. Suddenly, Roman was surrounded by a brilliant golden aura. It danced around him like flames. The aura intensified, swirling around his feet. The heat radiating from it was almost unbearable. Chris was absolutely stunned. He stammered, saying there was no way Roman could have done that. A surge of energy filled the air, and someone shouted in disbelief, asking if Roman was really manifesting aura. The golden aura blazed around Roman's body like a raging fire. The heat was intense. The energy crackled around Roman, the raw power almost visible to the exposed eye. It was like nothing Chris had ever seen. Chris watched the display of power, a small smile forming on his face. He muttered that it was exactly what he had expected. Chris continued, declaring that the way most people used ki was completely useless. He clearly thought he knew better. Chris explained that ki in Murim was used to remove all waste inside the body. The goal was to be able to store ki within the body. After that, the man sat in a meditative pose, a ball of swirling purple energy forming in his hands. Lightning crackled around him as he focused on gathering more power. Chris then said that things were different in this world. The rules he knew were about to change. Chris continued, saying that in this world, people gathered mana and hoped it would spread throughout their bodies. They didn't have to restrict it at all. Chris explained that if the key of Murim was barren, yet strong, this world was something else entirely. He seemed to be setting up a contrast between the two. The air crackled with energy, a visible storm of power. On one side, dark lightning surged, while on the other, a soft pink glow pulsed gently. The thing is, the mana in this world was full, but also light. It was like trying to hold water in your hands. It just slipped away. Turns out, that made it harder to control. Chris held a ball of energy in his hand, looking thoughtful. He figured that if he had to make a guess, the way they used aura here was similar to the external arts back in Murim, but not even close. He explained that while those arts could make someone stronger, they didn't help at all with storing mana inside the body. The problem, Chris explained, was that they just let the stored mana explode out of them. That was why it was so inefficient, like throwing away half your meal. Chris's eyes narrowed. He was thinking that using these methods, he wouldn't be able to reach reach the top, even if he trained for hundreds of years. He looked absolutely furious. The knight just stared, completely speechless. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. He finally managed to stammer out a question, wondering how Roman had pulled that off. It just didn't make any sense. Chris looked at Roman with wide eyes, trying to figure out what he had just witnessed. He asked if that had been aura just now. Chris was getting frustrated. He told Roman that he should be able to tell by himself, and that's why he was asking. Chris explained that it had taken him years to even manifest aura. Chris looked absolutely furious, his face red with anger. He demanded that Roman tell him the truth, accusing him of playing dumb and pretending he didn't know how to use mana. Chris's eyes widened as everything clicked into place. He exclaimed that it all made sense now, finally understanding what was going on. Chris wondered why he had even lost to Roman in the first place. He questioned that if Roman had this power 2 years ago, why didn't he use it then? Chris looked at Roman, explaining that he was misunderstanding everything. He denied hiding his power, asking that if that wasn't true, how would anything make sense? Chris reminded Roman that it had taken him over 10 years to become a 2-star knight. Roman just smirked, finding Chris's frustration amusing. Chris looked confused and asked Roman what was so funny. He was clearly missing something. Roman clenched his fist, his face turning red with anger. He asked if Chris was laughing at his efforts. Chris looked directly at Roman, his expression serious. He asked Roman if, while he was climbing for that goal, he had ever questioned the training methods that he was using. Chris's words hung in the air, a challenge to everything Roman thought he knew. He was pushing Roman to think differently. Chris's eyes burned with a strange intensity, the air around him seeming to crackle with energy. He was dead serious. Roman looked confused, trying to grasp what Chris was getting at. He stammered, asking what Chris was trying to say, adding that it's common for people to take things for granted. The words echoed in the air, emphasizing the unquestioned belief that the old ways were the only right ways. It was like everyone just accepted that an old training method was the best way to do things. Chris looked around at the trainees, his expression thoughtful. He explained that while he was learning aura, he had a thought. Chris continued, wondering why everyone was so stuck on this method, especially when it had some pretty obvious problems. He was really starting to question the whole system. Chris asked if they didn't know about the problems with the method, or if their faith in Captain Jonathan was just too strong. He paused, then said the reason was simple. The words hung in the air, revealing the simple truth. Turns out, it was just easier to teach it that way, even if it wasn't the best. The unyielding belief in old methods was a problem. Chris figured that if they only taught what they had learned, there wouldn't be people that would be met with loss or criticism. Chris looked at Roman and admitted that he didn't dismiss the fact that the 10 years of training were important. He was trying to be respectful, but he had a point to make. Chris's words cut deep as he pointed out that the fact that he didn't even question their methods once was the reason why he was laughing at him. He was trying to get Roman to think critically. Chris continued, explaining that there is nothing such as a perfect answer in the world. He added that even the methods that he decided to follow were all created due to a single person's worries for their successors. Roman stared ahead, absorbing the lesson. Those worries, he realized, were what caused pain in life. It was a lot to think about. Life throws problems and issues at you. That's a given. And when you fail, it's gonna hurt. Chris looked at Roman and the others, his expression serious. He told them that's when they have to deal with the criticism of others and their own despair. However, even if all that is true, change is still necessary. You can't stay stuck in the same place forever. It's just like how Chris dismissed his father's teachings to create his own path. You have to be willing to break away from tradition. Chris looked at Roman, his expression softening. He said that they should finish training there for the day. Chris's face was still bruised and bandaged, a reminder of the hard lessons he had learned. He trailed off, lost in thought. Roman watched Chris carefully. Something was clearly on Chris's mind, and Roman was starting to get worried. Chris turned back to Roman, his eyes pleading. He asked Roman to please tell him what he should do. Chris was desperate for guidance. He asked what he should do from there on out. Nearby, a hand lay on the ground, covered in blood. It was a sign of the pain and desperation that was all around them. They were both down, covered in dirt and blood. Roman was breathing hard, but the other guy wasn't moving much. He was the clear loser in this fight. A voice echoed, asking if he was going to keep fighting. The loser admitted that he had lost. The voice announced that the Blood Demon sect would now follow Baek Jong-hyuk of the Heavenly Demon sect. Someone shouted for everyone to wait. The defeated fighter stared at his broken sword, lying useless on the ground. He admitted that he had never seen anyone as strong as Roman Dmitri, and wanted to know what he needed to do to reach that level. The defeated fighter was willing to give everything. He declared that he would dedicate his body to Roman Dmitri. Kneeling in the dirt, the defeated fighter argued that it would help both of them if he became stronger. He was ready to do anything. The defeated fighter looked up, his face desperate. He was ready to start right now. He demanded to be told what to do. Chris, who was watching all this, looked pretty annoyed by the outburst. He didn't expect this guy to be so dramatic and shout about what he should do from now on. Roman Dmitri stared forward, his eyes reflecting a newfound determination. He had thrown away his pride, ready to do whatever it took to become stronger. The story went back to a time long ago. The fighter was an individual of note from the past who had conquered the blood demon sect under one order. This blood demon was someone who used to greatly influence the Morim. The fight was fierce, full of energy. The thing is, a battle over control between him and Baek Jong-hyuk was inevitable, and at the end of the long battle, he had lost. The blood demon was defeated. Roman thought about that kid from back then. He had decided to take the shame upon his name, all in order to be taught. The ability to throw away one's pride in order to become stronger. Roman thought that Chris was similar to the blood demon in that respect. Chris was asking for a way to get stronger. Roman said he couldn't just tell him something like that. So, he asked Chris what he wanted him to do. Roman only told Chris not to devotedly follow the methods he had been taught all his life. Roman spoke with a strange intensity. He said that if he were to just give Chris the answer, how would that be any different from what Chris had already done? But if Chris wanted to find the answer himself, he should keep listening. Chris looked up, surprised by Roman's words. He could only listen as Roman told him to follow him and learn from what he did. Roman's words hung in the air. He was going to leave for the war in 6 months. Roman told Chris to watch how he got stronger as he fought different enemies. He should pay close attention to the different ways Roman defeated them. And if Chris could still follow him after years, then Roman finished by saying that he could say with certainty that Chris would find his answer. It was a heavy promise. Chris stood there, his back to the world. He was trying to make sense of everything Roman had just told him, trying to figure out his next move. Hours later, the moon was high in the sky. The clouds drifted slowly, as if time itself was holding its breath. Looking through the window, the night sky seemed even more distant. It was like the world outside was a dream, and the room was the only real place. Chris sat on the edge of his bed, his head hanging low. He was completely worn out, both in body and mind. Tears streamed down Chris's face, mixing with the blood from his cuts. He was trying to wipe them away, but they just kept coming. Roman explained that you just have to train until you can sense mana. He added that you can already sense mana after half a year. He then continued that in order to manifest aura, you need to do more. Roman exclaimed that Chris was a genius, since he's a 1-star after only 3 years. He congratulated Chris, telling him that he was now a 1-star aura knight. Roman didn't dismiss the fact that Chris's 10 years worth of training were important, but the fact that Chris didn't even question their methods once was the reason why he was laughing at him. Chris's eyes narrowed with anger. He grit his teeth, promising himself that he would do it. He paused, confused by what he was seeing. The castle stood tall against the bright sky. Chris was stunned by what he had just heard. He asked what the other man had just said, needing to confirm he understood correctly. The answer came back immediately. He would follow the young master to the battlefield, no matter what. Chris declared that he wanted to get stronger. He was desperate to find a way to improve. Roman acknowledged that something had clearly happened to Chris. He confirmed that he was right. Chris looked determined, his eyes reflecting his newfound resolve. Roman stared back, a hint of a smile playing on his lips, as if he knew this was going to happen. Mr. Hans nodded slowly. He said that he could already tell that Chris had a good enough reason that pushed him to make this decision. Mr. Hans sat there, looking at the desk. The air in the room was thick with unspoken words, the weight of the decision hanging heavy. Mr. Hans stated that from now on, Chris was no longer a part of the Knights of Dmitri. Whatever happened, he hoped that Chris would be able to protect the young master as he pursued his goal. Chris just said, "Thank you." He looked relieved, but also a little sad. A voice broke the silence. "All right now." Mr. Hans stared intensely. He said that Chris was no longer. Chris stood silently, blood dripping from his armor. He didn't move a muscle, just listened carefully. The battlefield was a scene of death and destruction. A child reached out to his dead mother, crying in despair. The memory was painful. Mr. Hans said Chris wasn't that little kid who was crying for his dead mother on the battlefield anymore. Mr. Hans looked at Chris, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. He added that thanks to Chris, he was sure of one thing. If Chris was willing to follow young Master Roman, that would mean that young Master Roman wasn't someone who could be called an idiot anymore. Roman told Chris to follow him, saying he'd need to prepare himself from now on. Chris looked confused and asked what was going on. Roman explained that if Chris really wanted to survive on the battlefield, he'd need a secret weapon that he could call his own. Chris looked up, his eyes shining with determination. He agreed with Roman, calling him Master. Meanwhile, back in town, the wind carried whispers through the streets. People were talking, their voices hushed with a mix of excitement and fear. Someone asked if the others had heard the rumors going around. The bandages on his hand were a reminder of the brutal training they'd all endured. One of the men doubted that young Master Roman had taken care of the Bloodfang. He didn't think it made any sense, calling him a half-assed noble who didn't know how to do anything. The man continued, saying that even though all the stories he'd heard seemed real, there was no way. He figured the Knights of Dimitri must have planned everything out. Young Master Roman. Kevin looked up, surprised, and repeated that young Master Roman had taken care of the Bloodfang. It was the young master that was able to take care of them with a single branch. One of the men watched the fight, thinking that young Master Roman should be able to handle the Bloodfang by himself. He was sure that young Master Roman was strong enough to take care of them. Kevin looked shocked. He wondered if young Master Roman had really done all this just to keep his word. Kevin continued cleaning, but he was lost in thought. He figured there was no way young Master Roman would do anything for someone like him. But the thing is, he really did take care of the usury issue. Suddenly, another man called out, telling Kevin he needed to finish cleaning up if he wanted to go home. Kevin snapped out of his thoughts and replied that he was on it. Kevin started cleaning again. He decided he wanted to become someone like young Master Roman, someone strong enough to protect the people around them whenever he could. Kevin's face was set with determination. He realized that there were still people like the Bloodfang out there, and he needed to get stronger to protect his family. But the thing is, getting stronger was easier said than done. Kevin wondered how he could even begin. He thought that if he had another chance to meet young Master Roman, maybe, but he immediately dismissed the thought, figuring he wasn't lucky enough for that to happen. Suddenly, Kevin stopped dead in his tracks. His eyes went wide, and his face was filled with shock. His eye twitched slightly. He didn't expect this. The box of potatoes slipped from his hands. They tumbled to the ground. A voice called out, stunned, "Young Master?" Young Master Roman looked up, his expression calm. He said that it had been a while. Kevin stared, completely surprised. He stammered, asking why young Master Roman was there. But before he could even finish, he realized he needed to thank him. Kevin immediately dropped to his knees. He thanked young Master Roman. Kevin explained that his family was able to survive thanks to young Master Roman. He was incredibly grateful. Kevin told young Master Roman not to worry about that, and asked how he had been. Kevin explained that after the Bloodfang stopped threatening them, he was able to find a place to work thanks to Mr. Hance. Young Master Roman said he didn't know how Kevin could ever express his gratitude to him. He then said that if Kevin listened to his offer, maybe he'd get an idea on what to do. Young Master Roman explained that if Kevin accepted, he wouldn't have to be worried about his family's money problems. He'd be able to have a warm home and nice food. Young Master Roman continued, saying that Kevin could even enjoy a lavish lifestyle during his free time, unlike the work he did now. He said he'd make it so that happens. Young Master Roman declared that Kevin should live for him. Young Master Roman looked down at Kevin, his arms crossed. He promised that if Kevin pledged his loyalty to him, he'd give him a life he wouldn't regret. Kevin's eyes widened, considering the offer. He was thinking about the life he could have, the life young Master Roman was promising. He opened his mouth, ready to speak. His lips were trembling slightly, showing just how nervous he was. Kevin bowed his head, kneeling on the ground. He was ready to give up everything for young Master Roman. Kevin pledged his life to young Master Roman. He was ready to follow him anywhere, to do anything for him. Kevin was lying on the ground, blood dripping from his head. He declared that if young Master Roman told him to die, he'd do it without question, and that he would kill anyone Roman wanted gone. He continued, saying the only thing he asked was for young Master Roman to promise to protect his family. Kevin looked up, his face covered in blood. He finished by offering his life to young Master Roman, trusting him completely. Young Master Roman watched Kevin, his eyes narrowed. He thought to himself that Kevin was showing his loyalty with his own blood. The kid reminded him of some crazed stallion. Young Master Roman realized that with just a single order, Kevin would even go up against hundreds of enemies without hesitation. Kevin was surrounded by a fiery aura, his eyes burning with determination. He declared that he would never back down until the job was done. Like some crazed mare, Chris stood there, blood dripping down his face, and young Master Roman thought about him. He realized that because Chris resembled the blood demon, it made him think of him too. A strange feeling washed over young Master Roman, a sense of excitement and anticipation. He was sure that this would be worth his time. Young Master Roman smirked, his purple eyes gleaming with a newfound intensity. He declared that from this point onwards, the words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Young Master Roman had made his decision. They were his now. The Dimitri estate stood tall and imposing, a testament to the family's wealth and influence. The building was huge, with multiple levels and towers. Young Master Roman turned to Hans, telling him to take care of Kevin and help him get used to living here. Hans bowed his head, promising that he understood. Young Master Roman then spoke to Kevin, promising to visit him later and telling him to take care. Kevin thanked the young master, expressing his gratitude for everything he had done. Young Master Roman announced he would be in his library if anyone needed him. He turned and walked away, leaving the others behind. Hans turned to Kevin and asked if he wanted to look around the estate. Kevin's face lit up at the offer. The library was huge, with rows and rows of books, reaching up to the ceiling. The only sound was the soft creaking of the wooden stairs. At the desk, a candelabra stood next to stacks of books. An open book lay in the center, waiting to be read. The young master sat in his chair, reading about Aura Knights. He seemed very interested in the topic. The book was titled The Path of an Aura Knight. It seemed like a guide for those who wanted to become one. The book said that to become an Aura Knight, you must first show Aura, which marks you as a 1-star Aura Knight. It sounded like a difficult path. The young master read that to become a 2-star Aura Knight, you had to be able to cut steel using aura. Turns out, the intensity and strength of your aura determined your rank. The book continued, explaining that once someone became a 3-star Aura Knight, they were beyond normal comprehension. They also got special treatment within the kingdom. The book mentioned that a 6-star Knight existed within the Salamander continent, but there were currently no stories of anyone who had reached the 7-star rank. The book went on to say that even within the top 10 ranked knights, not everyone had reached the 6-star rank. It was a long road to the top, star knights and rankings. The young master was clearly thinking hard about what he was reading. The young master was thinking about the strength of his men. He figured that since he'd seen Chris at the 2-star level, even Jonathan at 3-star would only be as strong as a 2nd-class fighter. The book went on to describe the power of those who reached the 6-star rank. Apparently, they had gone beyond what humans were capable of. The flames they could make with their swords could reach for tens of meters, which was pretty wild. And the impact of those flames? The book said it was something else entirely. Turns out, there were only 12 people known to have reached star rank. And get this, they were treated like royalty, no matter where they came from. They were called the 12 Blades of the Continent. The young master was still thinking about the 12 Blades of the Continent. Or so they say, Roman muttered. Even from the information I have gotten, they seem strong. Roman continued to think about the 12 Blades. The fact they were able to reach this point with inefficient usage of Cake Yuan must mean that they are talented, the young master said to himself. Roman turned another page in the book, then thought out loud. And then there are the magicians. The book described the Archmage, a title of great power. The book explained that individuals who had reached the 7-circle rank were given the title Archmage. The image in the book showed an Archmage surrounded by roaring flames. The book described magicians as beings considered half man, half god, walking disasters waiting to strike. They were beings to be feared. The text continued, explaining that a single spell could level the earth and cloud the skies. The power they held was insane. A massive explosion of fire erupted, showing the scale of destruction that magicians could cause. The heat seemed to radiate from the book itself. The book warned that when magicians were dealt with in numbers, they were more dangerous than 6-star Aura Knights. The thought was terrifying. Roman's eyes narrowed as he read about magic, abilities that didn't exist within Murim. He realized he had a pretty good idea of what to do now, a plan forming in his mind. He placed his hand on the book, a sense of unease washing over him. He knew he wouldn't know when he'd be facing these beings. He thought about the odds of his father, Dmitri, doing something reckless. It was rare, but not impossible. Roman leaned back in his chair, his expression serious. The fact that he couldn't predict what might happen was what made this so dangerous. He was different from the others, though. He was never meant to stay in one place. He turned, his white hair catching the light. He was ready to leave and face whatever was coming. He realized he needed to gain experience and make sure he could live a life that he'd be happy with. He knew he had to do things his way. The young master's purple eyes gleamed with anticipation. This was going to be exciting. Roman figured it was time to get ready. He had a lot to do. The room was silent, waiting for the next move. Roman opened the door and stepped out, ready to face whatever was coming. The young master looked around, taking in the surroundings. This is it. What was this place used for? Hans answered. It was a workshop used by the old baron. Hans continued to explain as they walked toward the building. He made sure that outsiders were strictly prohibited and that even air couldn't pass through. Roman's eyes narrowed as he considered the possibilities. This will be perfect for training. Roman turned to Hans, a determined look on his face. Hans, I'll be spending the next week in this workshop. The young master gave his orders, making it clear he wouldn't need any food or anything else for that matter. But most importantly, He didn't want anyone coming in. Roman emphasized the gravity of the situation. No one was to approach him unless his people were in grave danger. He wouldn't tolerate any interruptions. Hans bowed his head slightly, acknowledging the young master's words. "Yes, young master," he replied, making sure his tone conveyed his understanding. The heavy wooden door creaked shut, sealing off the workshop. The sound echoed in the sudden silence, marking the beginning of Roman's isolation. Roman stood alone in the room, his expression unreadable. He was ready to begin, his mind focused on the task ahead. Roman looked down at the straw scattered on the floor. It seems that Hans put this here, he thought to himself. Roman stood up, looking down at the straw. "Although I appreciate the thought," he said, frowning. "It actually makes the flow of KEOI more erratic." He stared at the straw for a long moment, weighing his options. With it, he decided to get rid of it. With the straw gone, Roman sat down in a meditative pose. He closed his eyes, focusing on his breathing. He focused on the flow of energy within him. Up until now, I've only built up a minimum amount of mana, Roman thought, his brow furrowed in concentration. To master the techniques of the heavenly demon magician, Roman knew he had to start at the very beginning. He had to take things one step at a time. He was going to go back to the basics. It was time to start at the first step. Heavenly demon magician. First step, Roman thought. He knew what he had to do. He sat in the lotus position, the flames licking at the air around him. Human, he thought, focusing on his own humanity. Roman closed his eyes, his face tight with concentration. He needed to remove all the impurities within his body. The effort of removing the impurities was taking its toll. Veins bulged in his neck, and blood trickled down his skin. Roman could feel the mana struggling to flow through his body. The system warned him that his body was filled with more impurities than a normal teenager should have. Roman wasn't surprised by this setback. He had already predicted it. He knew he needed to gather just enough mana to push through the first step. The desire to regain his original strength burned in his mind. He needed to get back to the power he once had. Tears mixed with blood streamed from Roman's eye. He had decided to make this world his home, and he would need the power to protect the people he cared about. Roman sat cross-legged on the floor, light streaming in around him. He was entering a new stage of power, a new level of existence. He could feel the shift inside him. The system seemed to be telling him that this transformation was just the start. It was a long road ahead, but he was ready for it. 1 week later, the workshop was still off limits to everyone. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. Someone was coming, and they were in a hurry. The workshop door swung open with a click. It seemed someone had broken the young master's orders. The man assured them that he'd be back in a moment. He was going to get some tea and snacks, he said. He clarified who he was addressing, Viscount Lawrence and Ms. Flora. Viscount Lawrence and Flora stood there, waiting. The room was quiet, and they seemed to be expecting someone. Flora looked around, a bit impatient. Viscount Lawrence remained calm, but you could tell he was also curious about what was going on. Then, the silence was broken. It seemed like someone was about to say something important. Viscount Lawrence sighed, realizing they weren't exactly being welcomed with open arms. Even though he had decided to visit on a whim, it was clear they weren't wanted there. Viscount Lawrence decided they would just have to wait. He told Flora to take a seat and relax. Viscount Lawrence called out to Flora. She simply responded, "Yes, father." Viscount Lawrence told Flora that he had decided to come there to apologize for their mistake. He warned her to be careful about what she said. Suddenly, a voice boomed, asking if they had already announced their disengagement. The news hit like a thunderclap. Flora explained that she had decided to share her thoughts during her last visit. She added that she wanted to follow Viscount Lawrence's orders as well, trying to justify her actions. There was a pause, hanging in the air like a threat. Viscount Lawrence exploded, shouting that no matter how long he thought about it, he couldn't marry someone he didn't respect, especially not Flora. Viscount Lawrence looked absolutely furious. He said he really thought that Flora was a wise child, and he never thought she would do something like this. Viscount Lawrence demanded if Flora didn't understand what was going on within their territory. He explained that the Barco family had decided to borrow a large sum from the gold bank, and he questioned if she understood what that meant. The message was clear. The only thing left to do was prepare for war. It was a grim declaration. Flames engulfed the city as knights clashed, steel meeting steel. The brutal reality of war was unfolding. Viscount Lawrence sat heavily, declaring that the arranged marriage with Dimitri had been a necessary decision. He looked like he regretted saying it. Viscount Lawrence exploded in anger, shouting that the only ones capable of defending against Barco were the Dimitri family. He couldn't believe what was happening. Flora spoke up, her voice trembling slightly as she asked if the Lawrences still had a chance, even without the Dimitri family. She was desperate for any sign of hope. Viscount Lawrence frowned, explaining that if it were only the Barco family, they might have stood a chance. But the fact that the central government had approved questionable questionable documents and orders changed everything. The situation was made even worse by the fact that the central government was letting the Barco family borrow money without expecting anything back. It was blatant favoritism. The papers seemed to emphasize that this conflict had grown beyond a simple feud between two families. The scope was far larger now. Viscount Lawrence's face darkened as he said that those who were giving power to the Barco family were the ones who truly wanted to see their family destroyed. It was a conspiracy. Viscount Lawrence looked at Flora, his expression grim. Since their enemies now had a legitimate reason to attack, they would do everything in their power to finish them off. It was a bleak outlook. The words echoed, a reminder of what was at stake. Our land, our honor. These were not just words, but the foundation of their existence. Flora, known as the Flower of Lawrence, looked troubled. She knew what was coming, and it scared her. Even though I know, the words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken truths. It was time to face reality. Flora went on, admitting that she knew the circumstances of their territory and what her father was thinking when he made his decision. But even knowing everything, she chose to ignore it all for her own selfish reasons. Wake up. The command was sharp, a desperate plea for change. It was time to stop living in denial. Flora realized that if she kept clinging to her pride as the Flower of Lawrence, she would lose everything. She knew she had to change, and fast. Two servants paced back and forth, clearly worried. They wondered what they should do, and more importantly, when the young master would finally come out. Another servant looked up at the sky, his face etched with concern. He muttered that the Viscount and lady had been waiting since morning, and now the sun was already setting. The servant continued, saying that the Viscount and lady seemed pretty unhappy, but the young master had given strict orders not to be disturbed for any reason. The servant bit his lip, clearly torn. He knew the young master's orders were absolute, but he also knew the Viscount and lady wouldn't be happy if they were kept waiting any longer. Hans saw the young master returning and called out to him, "Young master, you're back." Hans stared, his eyes wide with shock. He could only manage to say, "Master." The room was silent, sunlight pouring in through the large windows. The air was still, but you could feel the tension hanging thick in the air. The teacup sat empty, a silent testament to the conversation that had just taken place. The delicate floral pattern seemed to mock the seriousness of the situation. Viscount Lawrence sat across from Flora, the distance between them feeling much greater than it actually was. They were both waiting, the weight of the impending conversation heavy on their shoulders. Viscount Lawrence's mind was made up. He was already determined to do this, no matter what. Flora looked down, her expression filled with regret, because all this stemmed from her mistake. Viscount Lawrence sat there, hands clasped tightly, his expression unreadable. He was thinking that in order for Lawrence to survive, he needed to make sure this marriage happened. But even then, his hands clenched together so hard his knuckles turned white. The decision weighed heavily on him, a physical burden. His face contorted in anger. This wasn't right. He was furious, his blue eyes blazing with a barely contained fire. Flora looked up, startled by his outburst. "Father?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Viscount Lawrence turned away, his face set with determination. "I'll go," he said, his voice firm despite the turmoil within. Viscount Lawrence was determined, and he declared that he would find Baron Dmitri himself. He would take matters into his own hands. A quill scratched across parchment, the writer's hand moving with purpose. Each stroke seemed deliberate, as if carefully chosen words were being committed to paper. Suddenly, a loud knocking echoed through the halls. The sound was insistent, demanding attention from whoever was inside. The door burst open, and a man stormed in, looking absolutely furious. "Baron Dmitri!" the yeller shouted. "What are you doing? Letting your guests wait for this long?" The yeller continued his rant, his face red with anger. "If you were that dissatisfied with us, you could have just told us to go back." He spat out the words, clearly offended. "I never would have thought that Dmitri would have been this cruel." Romero Dmitri paused, his pen hovering over the parchment. He seemed to be carefully considering his next move. The quill scratched against the paper as Romero Dmitri responded. "I understand what you mean," he wrote. "But have you made an appointment to meet with the Baron?" Viscount Lawrence exploded. "I know that," he shouted. "I know we decided to visit without an appointment, but we already shared our intentions to meet with him a week ago, and we had no choice but to do this, since he declined our request and hasn't shared any news since." Viscount Lawrence's face was red with fury. "If you decided to decline our visit in the first place, we wouldn't have been that offended. But this is. Do you think it would have been possible for me to decline a visit from the Viscount?" Viscount Lawrence glared, his voice dripping with challenge. "However, is that all you wanted to say?" Viscount Lawrence stared at Flora, his eyes narrowed. "Are you just here to share that you are angry, because you had to wait for half a day?" he asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. The story then jumped back to the day that Flora Lawrence visited the Dimitri family. Romero Dimitri remembered that Roman had shared his intentions to break up the arranged marriage with him. Although Romero Dimitri had no choice but to scold Roman for his decision, even a 3-year-old could tell what was happening. The reason was simple. Flora Lawrence was the reason Roman wanted to break up the arranged marriage. The guy sitting at the desk admitted that even though he had a clue about what was happening, he didn't question Roman. He knew that when Roman wanted to do something, he had no choice but to shut his mouth and just ignore it. Flora looked like she was about to cry. She said that they were victims of an unwanted arranged marriage. Flora continued, pointing out that the Lawrence family was actually the one that wanted the marriage in the first place. The Viscount of Lawrence clenched his fist, his knuckles turning white. He argued that he still thought his anger was justified just because he had to wait a little too long. The Viscount of Lawrence's voice rose as he reminded Flora that they didn't even want to meet in the first place. He accused her of being oblivious to her own mistakes. Viscount Lawrence slammed his fist on the desk, shaking everything on its surface. He was absolutely furious. Viscount Lawrence continued to rage, his voice booming. "And yet you still decided to come to me and complain." The room was silent for a moment, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. The Viscount of Lawrence took a breath, ready to drop another bomb. The Viscount of Lawrence explained, "About a month ago, we received contact from the Barco family. If we decided to move forward with an arranged marriage with the Barco family instead of the Lawrence family," the Viscount of Lawrence continued, stating that the Barco family would give them a chance to make connections with the central government. They would also give them part of the Lawrence territory. The speaker paused, the ink from the quill shimmering in the light. He then asked, "Even then, I still decided to decline the Barco family's offer. Do you know the reason why I decided to do that, Viscount?" Viscount Lawrence looked confused, sweat trickling down his brow. He asked, "Why did you decline that offer? It should have been more advantageous for you to take Barco's offer from your perspective." The speaker paused for dramatic effect. The reason was simple. Since Dimitri already had power, the speaker leaned forward, emphasizing his next words. "I decided to choose the option that we personally liked." The speaker finished his explanation. "Just because the eldest son of the Dimitris had an adoration for the flower of Lawrence," the man at the table declared. "Because of that sole reason, we decided to be faced with a war against the Barco family." He looked at them with a serious expression. The words echoed in his mind. This was a mistake. The weight of that realization hit him hard. Lawrence looked absolutely distraught. He thought to himself, "I should have stayed calm, but I made a big mistake because of my anger. What should I do? The flower of Lawrence and the fool of Dimitri." The man with the beard spoke sternly. "We know that the two of you are not the greatest pairing for each other. However, you should have remembered what the Dimitri family is all about." He emphasized the importance of their family. The Dimitri family crest glowed with power. Once the Dimitri family name was added to the end of Roman's name, his value changed. The weight of that name was now his burden to carry. The man declared, "On top of that, the ones desperate for this marriage," Viscount Lawrence continued, "isn't us, but in fact you, the Lawrence family." Viscount Lawrence paused, then asked, "Am I wrong?" Flora looked down, a clear worry washing over her face. Suddenly, a memory flashed in his mind, taking him back to when he was just a kid. Flora remembered her days back when she was still in the academy. The memory was so vivid, it felt like she was right back there. The system described the academy as a place where the children of royal families came to build their knowledge. It was a place of learning and connection. Inside the academy, students filled the classroom, listening to the instructor. They were all trying to build their knowledge and relationships, hoping to secure a better future for themselves. There was one family so small that their very right to exist was questioned. The system said that they only existed in name. The system identified him as the child of the Joel family. He was a reminder of a family that had fallen from grace. Joel sat at his desk, reading. He seemed lost in his own world, separate from the other students. Most of the kids there thought they were special, like treasures the world was lucky to have. They were all so stuck up, but Joel was different. He didn't act like he was better than everyone else. Then one day, everything changed for him. Joel made a small mistake. A vase lay shattered on the floor, water and flowers scattered around it. Turns out, while the children of the other named families didn't have much happen to them when they messed up, for Joel, they opened a whole punishment committee. He stood there, looking small and scared, as the teachers glared down at him. As the teachers kept scolding Joel for his mistake, a man who seemed to be his father showed up and immediately started apologizing. He asked them to forgive Joel, promising he'd teach his son better. He looked desperate, hoping they would show some mercy. During all of that, as I was watching from the back, I had one thought in my head. I couldn't help but feel sorry for Joel. Back then, I thought it was so sad. But now, when I think about it now, It seems so funny to me. I can't help but laugh a little. Flora, as the head of the Lawrence family, admitted she had nothing she could say. Hans scoffed, asking who was feeling sorry for who. He pointed out that his daughter, Flora, had made a huge mistake. Hans admitted that Joel was weak back then, and that Lawrence was in the same boat now. He said he should have apologized in the first place, and hoped they could forgive his ignorance and understand him. This world was simple, really. It was a world where the weak had to bow down to the strong, no questions asked. Flora looked down, feeling humiliated. She swallowed her pride and apologized, saying, "Baron Dmitri, I'm sorry to—" "My lord." The apology hung in the air, unfinished, but the weight of the words was heavy. The room was filled with tension. Flora, Hans, and Lawrence sat together, the silence broken only by the weight of their unspoken worries. Suddenly, a voice announced, "Young Master Roman has arrived." The heavy doors swung open. Flora's eyes widened, her expression shifting from concern to dawning comprehension. Something had finally clicked into place. That's when she realized the truth. But it was already too late. Heavy footsteps echoed in the room as someone approached. The sound was slow and deliberate. Roman walked in with a calm expression, his presence immediately commanding attention. He looked completely unfazed by the tension in the air. Roman's eyes narrowed slightly, a hint of amusement playing on his lips. He was ready to deal with whatever was about to happen. Roman Dmitri walked into the room, his voice echoing slightly. He announced, "Roman Dmitri, I have come to see you, father." Baron Dmitri looked up, his expression serious. "Are you done with your training?" he asked. He waited for Roman's answer. Baron Dmitri nodded slowly. "All right," he said, his gaze meeting Roman's. "We can talk about what happened to you later." Roman heard his father's words, his expression hardening slightly. The Baron stated, "The Lawrence family has come to talk about the arranged marriage issue." Baron Dmitri paused, his voice taking on a heavier tone. "Since all of this started due to your decision in the first place, I'll follow your decision, as the head of Dmitri, and as your father," he said. Roman listened to Flora, his expression thoughtful. He knew what she was trying to say, and he was willing to consider her point of view. Roman understood the implications of an union between their families. He knew the potential benefits and the possible drawbacks. Roman closed his eyes, taking a moment to consider everything that had been said. He was weighing the options carefully. Lawrence explained that if the Barco family were to threaten them, the influence of the Dmitri family would be crucial for their survival. He emphasized the strategic value of the marriage. Lawrence looked at Roman, a hint of confusion in his eyes. He asked, "And yet you still want the marriage to proceed?" "At the time, I thought that there was value in making that decision. But after I first met her, and she told me what she thought about the arranged marriage, my own thoughts changed as well. I started to see things differently. She must have heard the rumors about the fool of Dmitri, so Flora probably thought she couldn't marry someone like that. The rumor Roman Dmitri had made up his mind. He started to explain, "That's why." Hans Lawrence looked over at his daughter, Flora, who seemed to be expecting bad news. She stared at the floor, trying to hide her own disappointment. Roman continued, his voice firm, "I want no changes to occur, and for this marriage to be broken up." The room fell silent. The weight of Roman's words hung heavy in the air, leaving everyone unsure of what to say next. The Lawrences looked at each other in shock. It was over. The decision had been made, and there was no going back. Hans Lawrence was clearly worried. He admitted that the arranged marriage was the last chance his family had to get ahead. Since they already had a bad reputation, no other family would agree to a marriage. Hans Lawrence declared that they would have to solve their problems using only the resources within the Lawrence family. He looked determined, but I could see the worry in his eyes. Everyone in the room stood silently, the weight of Hans Lawrence's words hanging in the air. You could feel the tension as they realized how much was at stake. Hans Lawrence suddenly panicked. He realized if the Dmitri family and the Barco family decided to work together, things would get really bad. Hans Lawrence's voice trembled as he admitted they wouldn't even be able to put up a fight against such an alliance. The Lawrence family was truly in a corner. Hans Lawrence was desperate to avoid a disaster. He knew things would get worse if they didn't act fast, and he didn't want to see his family fall apart. Hans Lawrence looked down, accepting blame. He admitted that the Lawrence family was responsible for the situation they were in. The room was silent. You could feel the weight of the situation as the three men stood there, each lost in their own thoughts. Baron Dmitri looked to the side, his expression firm. He stated that the Dmitri family didn't bother thinking about the future when it came to solving problems. Flora Lawrence looked down, her voice soft as she spoke. She suggested that they announce to the public that she was breaking off the engagement for personal reasons, which would prevent the Dmitri family from working with the Barco family. Hans Lawrence looked down, showing his gratitude. He was thankful for the Baron's understanding. The Lawrences bowed deeply. Flora Lawrence and Hans Lawrence showed their respect to Baron Dmitri and Roman Dmitri. The Lawrences were extremely grateful. They were thankful for the Dimitri's understanding and willingness to compromise. Suddenly, the doors swung open with a loud creak. Someone was coming in. Hans Lawrence and Flora Lawrence quickly left the room. They were eager to get out of there. Hans Lawrence stared off into space. He seemed to be deep in thought, mulling over something important. Roman Dimitri stood tall in the room, facing his father. Baron Dimitri sat behind his large desk, his expression unreadable. Roman Dimitri's face was set. He was about to say something important. Hans Lawrence spoke, his voice filled with regret. "If I was aware of your true worth," Hans Lawrence continued, admitting his error, "I would have been more careful when telling Flora to not make any sudden decisions." Hans Lawrence turned away, his shoulders slumped. The man admitted, "I too have made a huge mistake." The heavy door clicked shut. The sound echoed in the silent room as Hans Lawrence left. Back in the office, Roman Dimitri stood across from his father. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Roman Dimitri's expression was hard to read. He simply replied, "Yes." Baron Dimitri leaned forward, studying his son. He asked, "What has happened to you over the past week?" A week passed. It was a long week. Roman Dimitri had spent that week locked inside the shed. The training had been brutal, leaving him covered in blood and sweat. Roman Dimitri was focused on training his body, trying to remove all the impurities within it. His goal was to reach the human stage. Roman Dimitri knew that within the human stage, there were steps to prepare his body to become a heavenly demon magician. While it wasn't considered impressive by Miram standards, he was determined. The thing is, given the sheer amount of mana that exists in nature in this world, he figured it was worth a shot. The amount of impurities inside Roman Dimitri's body was insane. He could feel the heat burning away at his skin, pushing him to his absolute limit. Preparing even the foundation of the body was essential. It was the only way to ensure that he could reach the human stage. Roman Dimitri closed his eyes, focusing all of his energy. The flames around him roared as he tried to push past his limits. The training had a significant effect. He could feel his body changing, adapting to the strain. Roman Dimitri opened his eyes, a new fire burning within them. "The changes in my physical appearance is proof that I've become a completely different person than before." Romero Dimitri began to explain, but he admitted it was difficult to put into words. He had somehow managed to open his mind during his training, though he couldn't recall the specifics of how he did it. Romero Dimitri continued, stating that he believed mana had begun to circulate throughout his body. The Baron looked utterly shocked, his eyes widening. The system defined mana circulation as a phenomenon that draws mana from nature into the body, improving one's physical capabilities. The Baron stared up at his son, clearly stunned. He thought to himself that mana circulation was something that should only happen to a select few. The system seemed to echo the Baron's thoughts, reminding him of Roman, the fool of Dimitri. It was almost impossible to believe. Roman Dimitri stood there, listening intently. He was told to complete incredible tasks, including taking out Bloodfang. It was a heavy burden to bear. The system seemed to be in awe. It stated that he had begun to grow beyond human comprehension. It was almost unbelievable. Romero Dimitri looked determined. Even with all that had happened, it still didn't change the fact that Roman was his son. He wouldn't abandon him. Romero Dimitri continued, telling his son to be aware of something. As his father, he would be sure to lend him a hand whenever he needed it. He meant every word. The system seemed to emphasize something important. It stated to not forget the fact that his name was Roman Dimitri and that his father was Romero Dimitri. It was a bond that couldn't be broken. Romero Dimitri looked at his son, his face a mask of resolve. He knew the challenges ahead were immense, but he wouldn't let Roman face them alone. Roman Dimitri listened to his father's words. He knew Romero would always support him from behind, no matter what. The moment he was alone, Roman's expression shifted. He gripped the hilt of his sword, his eyes narrowing with determination. Roman Dimitri knelt before the man, his posture showing respect. He was ready to accept whatever task was given to him, no matter how difficult. The man towered over Roman, his face unreadable. His gaze was intense, as if he were peering into Roman's very soul. The voice echoed, laced with contempt. It dismissed him as a foolish kid. Roman's eyes narrowed, a flicker of something akin to understanding crossing his face. He was starting to see things differently. Romero Dimitri sat there, thinking to himself. He was a father who wasn't cold or ruthless, but supported his son without any hidden motives. Roman's expression softened, a rare moment of vulnerability showing on his face. He was genuinely moved. A wave of gratitude washed over Roman. He spoke softly. "Thank you, father." Roman looked at her, a slight smile playing on his lips. "It's not bad," he admitted. Roman paused for a moment, considering what to say next. He started, searching for the right words. Flora looked at Roman, waiting for his response. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Flora's expression softened, and she spoke with sincerity. "I'm really sorry," she said, meaning every word. Flora continued, her voice full of regret, "for judging you too quickly, and for causing so many issues for both of our families." Roman stood there, his expression unreadable. "There's no need to apologize," he said, his voice calm, "since I had no intentions to continue with this marriage anyway." Roman continued, his gaze steady. "I understand the reasons for why you're angry," he told her. "Even if it is an arranged marriage that both of us didn't agree upon, I still broke the promise without discussing it with others." Roman paused, his eyes meeting Flora's. "However, I wanted to tell you this while I still had the chance," he said, his voice dropping slightly. Roman's expression turned serious. "The fact that I have a special reason for why I had to cancel our marriage," he revealed, his voice low. The reason for his decision, it turns out, was tied to something else entirely. The social gathering that royal families of the Northeast host, Roman explained. It was something that happened there. The ladies whispered amongst themselves, their voices barely audible. The rumors surrounding the engagement to a Dimitri had spread like wildfire, each tale more outrageous than the last. The woman's expression shifted, the playful smile fading from her lips. The name Roman Dimitri hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. A moment of silence stretched between them, thick with anticipation. Whatever was about to be revealed, it was clear that it was serious. Flora confronted Roman, her voice laced with concern and accusation. "The fact that you enjoy drugs," she said, her eyes searching his. "Drugs that eat away at one's sanity and knowledge." Flora's gaze softened, her voice tinged with a hint of sadness. "I thought that should be something you should know," she said, her expression unreadable. Roman stared into the distance, his expression clouded with a hint of regret. He admitted to himself that, although he now knew the rumors were all false, they had still affected him. Roman walked alongside Flora, trying to reassure her. He explained that, at the time, he couldn't ignore the rumors, but whatever happened didn't change their relationship right now. Roman continued to speak, his voice firm and confident. He told Flora that there was no need for her to worry anymore, trying to put her mind at ease. Flora watched Roman walk away, her brow furrowed with worry. Despite his words, a sense of unease lingered in her heart. The moonlight streamed through the window, casting a soft glow across the room. The night was quiet, but the air was thick with unspoken tension. Roman sat in his chair, lost in thought as Hans brought in the tea. The room was quiet, the only sound the gentle clinking of the porcelain. The rumors swirled in Roman's mind, echoing the accusations he had heard. Drugs, they said. Roman considered the accusation, but he couldn't sense any trace of drugs in his body. Roman picked up the teacup. Although there had been signs of medicine when he tried to end his life, it had completely left his system after his training. Roman looked up at Hans. Hans looked absolutely shocked. "Have you ever seen me enjoying drugs, or been in any situation where you suspected that I was using drugs?" "What?" Hans asked, clearly taken aback by the question. Roman looked at Hans calmly. "I'm not trying to mess with you, or anything," Roman explained. "I'm just trying to use this time to look back at the life choices I've made until now." Roman continued, explaining that he wasn't using his own memories, but trying to see things from an outside perspective. He added, "If you want to go that far." Hans hesitated for a moment. "About that," he said, pausing, "although I've never seen it with my own two eyes." Hans continued, admitting, "There were times when I thought your actions were a bit odd." Roman leaned forward slightly. "And when was that?" he asked. "About a month before all this. Things had been different. It's important to understand what happened back then, to understand what's happening now." Hans recalled that Roman had just returned from a social party. He looked like he was dressed the part, wearing a nice suit. Hans continued, saying the party itself wasn't a big deal, but he remembered that when Roman came back, Hans paused, trying to recall the right words. Roman, he said, had seemed to be in a very odd state. Roman's eyes were wide with confusion. He was sweating like crazy too. Hans explained that soon after, it was like Roman just gave up on life. He shut himself away in his room, refusing to come out. And every single night, Hans continued, Roman was asking for more and more alcohol. That's when things got really worrying. Hans admitted that he'd started to suspect Roman might have gotten his hands on drugs at that party. Hans looked at Roman, saying he couldn't believe he would do drugs, but he had to admit it seemed pretty far-fetched now. Flora spoke up, adding that it was a social gathering that the royal families of the Northeast hosted. The man with white hair asked, his eyes intense, "Do you know who was the host of that party?" The answer came back quickly. The eldest son of Barco. The man in the uniform paused for a moment before continuing. "His name is Anthony Barco." The man with white hair spoke again. Roman, who had an arranged marriage planned with Lawrence, got invited to a social party hosted by Barco. The story continued, had sudden changes in his mental state. The man in uniform continued the the grim tale. Roman Dmitri, the one set to marry Flora Lawrence, went to a party hosted by the man started to explain what was going on. There were things about Roman's death that didn't quite add up. The speaker continued, explaining that the only thing mentioned in Roman's will was that he went to battle instead of his two younger siblings. He was also apparently scared about what might happen, but nothing else was said. Then Flora spoke up, explaining that Roman was already promised to be married to her. Another man chimed in, saying that there were plenty of ways for married members of royalty to avoid going to war. Roman's eyes narrowed, clearly not buying it. He thought, so he decided to kill himself just because he was afraid of war? That's insane. Something wasn't right. He felt it in his gut, a nagging feeling that the story he'd been told was missing something. Roman leaned back in his chair, looking at Hans suspiciously. Hans, did it seem like Anthony Barco and I were close? He asked. Hans was quick to respond. There wasn't a single person that spent time with you, young master. Oh, however, it did seem like you were on bad terms recently. Roman frowned, thinking hard. That was around the time when talks of marriage with Lawrence began. The arranged marriage between Dmitri and Lawrence was a big political matter. The Barco family wanted nothing more than to take control over the land owned by Lawrence. The arranged marriage was a big obstacle for them. The easiest way to solve that problem? Stop the marriage before it even happened. The idea hung in the air, heavy with implication. They must have done everything they could to Roman. The thought sent a chill down his spine, and that's what led Roman to kill himself. It was a grim conclusion, but it made a terrible kind of sense. Young master, someone spoke, interrupting his thoughts. Actually, a couple of days ago, we received an invitation from the Barco family, Hans said. The name hung in the air like a threat. Roman's eyes narrowed as he heard the news. The Barcos sent me an invitation, he asked, a hint of suspicion in his voice. Hans held out the invitation, looking worried. Yes, he said. Unfortunately, it was around the time that you went into training. What should I do about it? Roman smirked, his eyes gleaming with confidence. How brazen, he said. No, they're just underestimating me, whichever it is. The words hung in the air, suggesting Roman was already planning his next move. Roman's eyes glowed with a dangerous light. Something wicked was brewing in his mind, and the Barcos were about to find out exactly what he was capable of. Something was clearly weighing on his mind. It was bothering him, eating away at his thoughts. The question hung in the air. When is the party? Turns out it was exactly 2 weeks away. The order was given. Tell the Barcos. Roman sat there, calm and collected, a slight smile playing on his lips. He was ready. The message was clear. Roman would be attending the party. The Barco estate loomed large, its white walls gleaming under the sun. A strange statue perched atop the building, watching over the grounds. An attendant gestured to the side, informing Kevin that the young master was waiting for him. He thanked the attendant politely. The attendant leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. He warned Kevin not to be too surprised by how different the young master seemed these days. The heavy door creaked open, revealing the room beyond. Kevin stepped into the room, a bit nervous. He asked if the young master had called for him. The young master looked at the approaching figure, his expression unreadable. He wondered aloud if it was Kevin who stood before him. Kevin's eyes widened in surprise. He stammered, "Young master?" He realized this must be what the attendant meant about the change in atmosphere. Roman stood in the training hall, a sword loosely held in his hand. He casually asked Kevin how he had been recently. Kevin replied quickly, "Oh, yes, young master. I've been getting used to things, all thanks to Hans helping around." But Kevin trailed off, his brow furrowed with worry. He started to say something, but stopped himself. He didn't know what to say. Kevin was thinking about his place in all of this. He had been wondering what his role was going to be. Kevin looked down, his face etched with doubt. He wasn't sure if he could actually do anything for the young master. Kevin continued, a hint of desperation in his voice. He admitted that he didn't understand how someone as ordinary as him could actually be useful. He wanted to know if there was anything he could really do. Roman paused, his purple eyes fixed on Kevin. He was about to tell him what his role would be. Roman declared his intentions, his voice firm and unwavering. He intended to use Kevin as his sword. Kevin stood there, a look of total surprise on his face. The news that he was to be Roman's sword had hit him hard. Kevin's face was a mix of shock and confusion. "Your sword?" he asked, not quite believing what he was hearing. Roman gestured with his hand, his expression serious. "However, figuring out what you're good at isn't something someone else decides. That's why I'll give you 3 paths that you can choose yourself. Roman continued, his voice calm and steady. The first is to give up your use as a sword. If holding a sword and bloodshed is what you're afraid of, you don't have to be my sword, but my hands and feet. Roman gestured towards Hans, who stood nearby. You can learn by following Hans and do as he tells you to do so. That would be what your role would be, Roman explained. Roman held up the sword, the metal glinting in the light. He told Kevin that the second path was to become his sword, to protect him and stand by his side. Kevin looked surprised, his eyes wide. He stammered, telling Roman that he'd never even touched a sword before in his life. Roman nodded, acknowledging Kevin's worry, and said that's exactly why, if Kevin chose this path, things would get intense. Roman's voice turned serious as he spoke of telling Kevin's will. He warned him that he would use methods that would cause excruciating pain. Kevin's face paled, and he looked like he might be sick. Excruciating pain, he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. The words limb-crushing flashed before him, a stark warning of the agony to come. The air seemed to crackle with the promise of unbearable suffering. The image showed a body consumed by a terrible force, bones twisting and muscles being torn apart. It was a method of causing pain so intense, it felt like every bone and muscle was being crushed. Kevin looked uneasy, but Roman's words hung in the air. It wouldn't be empty talk, but a promise backed by Kevin's own willingness to prove his worth. Roman raised the sword, the metal catching the light. He then said that there was one last option. The words seemed to hang in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning, to take this sword. Kevin stared at the sword, the polished metal reflecting his own conflicted expression. He was considering his options, carefully weighing the paths laid out before him. The idea hung in the air, stark and brutal, to cut off his own hand. It was a shocking suggestion. The voice continued, the words now focused on the concept of self-inflicted pain. It was a strange and unsettling thought. The words emphasized enduring that pain, pushing through it until the very end. It was a test of will, a trial by fire. Kevin stared up at Roman, waiting for him to finish. The air was thick with anticipation, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. The final words promised immense power, a strength that would grow faster than anyone else's. All it would cost was the ability to endure the pain. Roman spoke with conviction, telling Kevin that even the mad demon, who started as a stray on the streets, became one of the 4 heavenly kings with nothing but his will. Meanwhile, Kevin sat there hunched over, listening intently. Roman's gaze sharpened, his eyes piercing as he stared directly at Kevin. He wanted to know what Kevin would do. Roman continued, making it clear that whatever choice Kevin made, he would make sure to get his money's worth out of him. He wasn't going to let Kevin slack off, no matter what. Roman then told Kevin that how he was used was up to Kevin himself. It was Kevin's choice to make. Kevin stood there, staring down at the sword in front of him. The decision weighed heavily on him as he considered his options. Outside Dimitri Castle, the wind carried the scent of distant fields and the promise of a new day. In an old house that looked like it could fall apart any second, life began for someone. That's where it all started for him. He was born there. A baby, small and fragile, lay in a worn-out bed, crying out into the world. Since he was little, Kevin had to work to survive, carrying wood alongside the adults. He was just a kid, but life didn't care about that. Kevin pushed the heavy cart, his muscles straining with the effort. Thanks to helping his parents with everything, he'd learned how to do every job there was. However, Kevin's life stayed the same. No matter how hard he worked, nothing seemed to change for him. No matter how much effort he put in, there was always someone there to take it away from him. It was a constant struggle. That was the life of the weak. He knew he had to change something. That's why, from now on, things would be different. He would make sure of it. Kevin couldn't shake off the image from his mind. The things he'd witnessed earlier were still replaying in his head. He stood there, his back to the world, lost in thought. His fists were clenched tight as he tried to process everything. That overwhelming strength, it was something he'd never imagined possible. To cut off his own hand, Kevin didn't understand what that would do for him. It seemed like a crazy idea, but as long as he could get stronger, if he could even imitate the strength that the young master showed, Kevin was willing to try anything. Kevin's face was set with determination. He was ready to escape the life that had been draining him dry. He thought to himself, he'd do whatever it took. Meanwhile, Roman watched with a slight smile. He seemed to already know what Kevin was going to do. He just waited. Kevin's hand tightened around the hilt of the sword. He closed his eyes, ready to do what he had to do. He was really going to go through with this. With a yell, Kevin raised the sword high above his head. He was sweating, but he didn't hesitate. He was committed to seeing this through. His knuckles were white as he gripped the sword. The air was thick with anticipation. He was about to change everything. Kevin screamed at the top of his lungs, his face twisted in frustration. Roman looked up at Kevin, his expression unreadable. A voice echoed, filled with annoyance. It sounded like someone was at their wits' end. Footsteps echoed on the stone floor, each step heavy with discontent. Someone was walking away, clearly unhappy. Chris grumbled to himself, his face etched with annoyance. I finally decided to leave the knights and follow the young master, and he suddenly decides to go into training for a week. Are you kidding me? Hans's voice boomed through the hallway. Vice Captain Chris? He asked, his eyes narrowing in on him. The guard asked where the young master was. He was told that Roman was talking with Kevin, and that he shouldn't let anyone in while they were talking. Chris heard Kevin's name and looked up, clearly confused. Suddenly, a brutal sword appeared, dripping with red. The guard wondered who it belonged to, his heart pounding in his chest. A hand fell, covered in blood. It was a gruesome sight, and it was clear something terrible had just happened. Kevin gasped in pain, his face splattered with blood. He couldn't believe what he had just done. Kevin stood there, staring down at his hand and the brutal sword. In the background, Roman watched him with a strange expression on his face, not saying a word. Suddenly, Kevin lost his balance and fell backwards. The shock of what he had done was finally hitting him. Roman stood over Kevin, looking down at him. He didn't seem surprised or concerned, just observant. Lying on the ground, Kevin stared up at Roman, his eyes wide with a mix of pain and disbelief. He was starting to realize just how serious this was. Suddenly, the door burst open, and someone shouted, "Wait! Young master!" Hans rushed in, spotting the blood on the sword. "When did you get hurt? There's blood all over the blade," he asked, clearly worried. Roman stood behind Hans, sickled, looking unfazed. "It's nothing to worry about," he said calmly, "but it's fine." Roman's eyes narrowed, a strange glint in them. "It's not my blood," he clarified. He then explained that at the very moment Kevin was about to cut his own hand off, Roman admitted that he had put Kevin in an illusion to stop him. Kevin stood there, a thin line of blood trickling down his wrist. He looked determined, not even flinching at the sight of the blood. Suddenly, the system flashed a message. Charm of the illusion demon. Roman continued to explain what happened. He said that while he was trying to test Kevin by putting him in an illusion for a short period of time, Roman revealed that Kevin swung down on his wrist with the sword just before he fell into the illusion. Roman's lips curled into a slight smirk. That vicious kid, he thought to himself, clearly impressed. It was a close call, all right. If the spell had been any weaker, Kevin might have completely cut off his hand. That would have been a disaster. 2 weeks until the party. Chris lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, lost in thought about the upcoming event. 6 months until the war. Kevin stared at his bandaged wrist, a grim reminder of the battles to come. There was so much to teach. Roman smirked, knowing the road ahead would be difficult. Roman knew he'd be getting busy soon. The pieces were set, and the game was about to begin. The entrance to the building stood silent, but the words hung heavy in the air. The upcoming technique was incredibly dangerous. Kevin looked at Roman, surprised. "You're going to teach me a mana enhancement technique?" Roman nodded. "That's right," he replied, his expression serious. Roman's purple eyes narrowed as he explained. "It's not any ordinary technique. It's actually a technique that the mad demon used. The technique was ancient, a martial art lost to time. It had been locked away in the main house's treasury for generations. The name of this dangerous technique echoed in the air, the Soul Spirit God technique. The technique was a dangerous one, Roman warned. It would eat away at the user's spirit, consuming them from the inside out. But that wasn't all. Roman continued explaining that it allowed them to show power, even when they were in terrible pain, pushing their bodies far beyond their limits. The most important thing, Roman said, was that even if all their limbs were cut off, the user could never lose their spirit. The user's face was contorted in agony, tears streaming down their face as the green energy burned through them. It was a pain that would break most people. Roman paused, then added that the mad demon had been very useful to him. He had mastered this technique under extreme pain, pushing himself to the very edge. The young master thought that if Kevin had the will to cut off his own hand, then he was capable of learning the technique. It was a brutal requirement, but necessary. The young master looked at Kevin, explaining that as this technique grew stronger and stronger, he must endure pain much greater than yesterday's. It was a constant test of his resolve. The young master continued, explaining that even with all this, there was one reason why he was teaching Kevin this technique. This was the fastest way to teach a teenager who didn't even know the basics of mana. Kevin was amazed. If he mastered this technique, he would have the strength to protect everything around him. The young master had saved him, wiped out Bloodfang, and now he was even bestowing a technique upon him. Kevin looked up, a nervous expression on his face. He hesitated for a moment before speaking. Young master? Kevin started. Kevin looked at the young master, telling him how grateful he was for everything. But there was something else on his mind. Kevin took a breath, and asked the young master why he trusted him so much. Kevin looked down at his bandaged wrist, saying that he swore he would offer his life, but he hadn't shown the young master anything yet. He admitted he might even run away after learning this technique. Kevin looked up, pleading with his eyes. He wanted to know why the young master trusted him so much. The young master just smiled slightly, answering, "Just because." Kevin stared at the young master, completely stunned. "Just because?" he repeated, clearly not expecting such a simple answer. The young master turned, telling Kevin that they would start training tomorrow. He told Kevin to get some rest for today. The young master watched Kevin walk away, wondering why he could trust him so much. Then he remembered that the mad demon had asked the same question. The young master thought to himself that unconditional trust could only be obtained once you believe in that person. The young master looked at Kevin, a small smile forming on his face. He was sure that Kevin would never betray him. Kevin looked up, his face showing that he was taking in the young master's words. The young master's voice echoed, explaining that as Kevin got stronger, he would realize just how dangerous something was. The young master's disembodied voice lingered in the air, the words hanging heavy with unspoken implications. It was dangerous to betray the heavenly. The young master stared down, his expression unreadable in the dim light. He seemed to be waiting for Kevin to understand the weight of his words. Far from the training grounds, the massive structure of the Dimitri estate stood tall against the sky. The building was silent, holding secrets within its walls. Elsewhere, a hand tightened around the hilt of a sword, knuckles turning white. The blade gleamed faintly, promising violence. Kevin swung the heavy training hammer with all his might. Roman watched him closely, explaining that the basics were key to every action. He stressed that each movement had to be performed correctly. The young master's voice echoed in Kevin's mind. He told Kevin not to lose focus. Kevin's brow furrowed as he tried to concentrate on the task at hand. Kevin nodded firmly, determination etched on his face. "Yes," he exclaimed, ready to push himself even further. A loud yell pierced the air, echoing through the training grounds. It was a sound of frustration and confusion. Chris sat on a crate, looking completely lost. "I don't understand," he muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. Kevin swung the sword, but he was clearly distracted. He wondered why the young master was teaching swordsmanship to him, a strange kid, instead of someone else. Meanwhile, Chris was getting annoyed. He had thought that following the young master would help him get stronger fast, but he was being ignored. Chris figured it might be better to just swing his sword next to the master, even if he wasn't being taught directly. Should he just beg the young master to take him back? Chris looked up at the sky, lost in thought. The training grounds were quiet around him, and the sun beat down on his face as he considered his options. Chris decided to wait a little longer. He wanted to see what would happen before making any rash decisions. Days passed, each one feeling the same as the last, with Chris sitting and waiting. He was starting to get really impatient. Chris slammed his hand down, finally losing his cool. "Screw this," he shouted. Chris marched up to Roman, his face set with determination. "Young Master Roman," he called out. Chris was clearly upset. "It's already been over 2 weeks since I decided to follow you," he started. Chris continued, his voice rising in frustration. "The first week was a waste because you were training yourself, and for the week after that, you've kept me on the sidelines while you train Kevin." Chris took a deep breath, trying to keep his voice steady. "If you're acting like this because I was rude to you at first, then I sincerely apologize." Chris looked at Roman, hoping he'd understand. "So please, teach me something as well. I'm confident I can learn anything you teach me." Roman just stared, his expression unreadable. It was hard to tell what he was thinking. Roman tilted his head, a hint of sarcasm in his voice. "Didn't I tell you before? Just learn while observing me." Chris looked back, confused. "You meant literally, observe you and learn." Roman turned and started walking away, dismissing Chris's confusion. Everyone has their own way of learning. Roman looked at Kevin. Since Kevin didn't know anything, Roman believed he needed to guide him from the beginning until he reached a certain level. Roman's explanation continued, making it clear that he felt responsible for Kevin's growth. He needed to guide him every step of the way. Roman then turned his gaze to Chris. He explained that Chris was different, and no matter what he taught him, Chris would just try to force himself to learn what Roman, the person who defeated him, said. Roman continued, saying that Chris wouldn't seriously try to understand it. He would just try to force himself to learn what Roman told him. Chris looked at Roman, a bit annoyed. So, he asked if Roman wanted him to just keep observing him, but Roman simply said no. Chris looked down at the wooden sword in his hands, completely baffled. He didn't understand why Roman wanted him to use this thing. Chris stared at the wooden sword, not understanding. He asked, "What? Why a wooden sword? You need results to accept the truth." Roman wanted to see what Chris could do, so he suggested, "How about it? Have a spar with Kevin." Chris's eyes widened, surprised by the suggestion. Roman continued, "In this spar, even if Kevin is your opponent." Roman looked at Chris with confidence. He finished, "I will advise him on how to defeat you. Kevin is basically my copy." Chris Chris looked serious as he told Roman that if Roman still thought he was correct after this spar, then he would start teaching him personally. Chris was determined to show Roman what he was capable of. Kevin looked completely shocked. He couldn't believe he was being asked to spar with a knight. Kevin stammered, asking if Roman wanted him to spar with this novice. Kevin's face contorted in anger. He thought to himself, what the hell did Roman take him for? He was starting to feel insulted. Kevin paused for a moment, trying to control his anger. He finally said that he understood and agreed to do it. Kevin looked at Roman with determination. He was going to show him right here and now that he wasn't just some pushover. He would prove his worth. The sky was clear and blue, without a cloud in sight. The air was still, as if the world was holding its breath. Kevin stood in the center of the training area, sword in hand. Chris watched him from the side, his arms crossed. Roman told Kevin that sparring with a 2-star knight put him at a disadvantage, but he asked Kevin what he would lose from a defeat. Kevin's reply was simple and direct. Nothing. Roman continued, explaining that there were countless people stronger than him in this world. He said that Bloodfang, who oppressed his family, and Chris, who couldn't wait to beat him down, were no different. Kevin's brow furrowed as he glared, demanding if his opponent was planning to do absolutely nothing. He looked absolutely furious. Kevin's expression hardened as he replied that he would give it a shot. He looked determined. Chris looked absolutely pissed off, wondering why he had to spar with a novice like Kevin. He couldn't understand why Kevin's eyes looked like he actually had a chance of winning. Roman thought to himself that the young master thought he could completely tame him with this match, but he was ready for whatever came next. Chris's eyes narrowed, focused on the upcoming spar, or whatever it was going to be. He was ready to end this quickly. It was time to start. The two men stood ready, waiting for the signal to begin. Chris didn't hesitate. He immediately swung his sword at Kevin, trying to end the fight quickly. Chris was sure he couldn't lose to this newbie, who had only been training for a week. He was completely underestimating his opponent. The sound of metal echoed as Chris's sword clashed against Kevin's. The force of the impact reverberated through their arms. Kevin's eyes widened. He didn't expect Chris to be so strong. The sound of wood splintering filled the air. Whatever had just happened, it sounded like it hurt. Chris didn't hold back. He swung the wooden sword with all his might, hitting Kevin hard across the chest. The force of the blow sent shockwaves through Kevin's body. Kevin gasped as the wooden sword connected. His eyes went wide with pain and surprise. He hadn't expected Chris to be so relentless. Kevin staggered back, trying to regain his balance. Chris didn't give him a chance to recover. He pressed forward, ready to continue the attack. Chris looked serious, preparing to fight. Kevin, on the other hand, looked like he was trying to psych himself up for what was about to happen. A voice echoed, instructing Kevin to guard his front. Kevin's eyes widened as he heard the voice warn him that Chris would try a surprise attack. The voice shouted to begin, and Chris didn't waste a second. He charged at Kevin, swinging the wooden sword. Chris's wooden sword slammed into Kevin's raised weapon. Kevin grunted at the force of the blow. Roman's voice echoed in Kevin's mind, telling him to take a step to the side. He was also instructed to aim for Chris's chest as Chris tried to kick him. Kevin focused, trying to remember Roman's words. He took a step to the side, just like he was told. Kevin moved quickly, following the instructions perfectly. He swung the wooden sword, hitting Chris hard in the chest. The force of the hit sent Chris flying backwards. He crashed to the ground, completely surprised by the sudden attack. Chris coughed, struggling to catch his breath. He lay on the ground, winded and defeated. Kevin groaned, lying flat on his back, clearly in pain. But then he heard Roman's voice telling him to get up. Kevin was stunned. That voice, it was young Master Roman? Roman explained that he was using sound conduction, a method to deliver sound through mana. He added that he would be giving Kevin instructions using this method. Kevin was completely blown away. Sound conduction. He wondered if even things like that were possible with mana. Suddenly, Roman's voice echoed in Kevin's head again, telling him to throw himself to the right. Kevin didn't waste a second. He charged at Chris, swinging the wooden sword with all his might. The force behind the blow was clear. Chris's eyes widened slightly. Then, Kevin heard Roman's voice in his head, clear as day. He was told to turn around and aim for Chris's left chest. Without hesitation, Kevin followed Roman's instructions. He spun around and swung the wooden sword, hitting Chris squarely in the back. The force of the blow sent Chris flying forward. He crashed into the ground, a look of shock on his face. Chris lay on the ground, clearly defeated. Kevin stood over him, panting slightly. The fight was over. Kevin looked down, frustrated. He had seen the opening, but he just wasn't fast enough to take advantage of it. He cursed himself for missing the chance. Suddenly, Roman's voice echoed in Kevin's mind, warning him to block above. Kevin's eyes darted upwards, trying to figure out what was coming. Before Kevin could react, Chris swung his wooden sword down with incredible speed. The air whistled as the blade hurtled towards Kevin's head. Again, Roman's voice cut through Kevin's thoughts, telling him to escape to his right. Kevin gritted his teeth, trying to process the information and react at the same time, but it was too late. The wooden sword slammed into Kevin's side, sending him flying through the air. He crashed into the ground, the impact knocking the wind out of him. Kevin grunted, blood dripping from his nose. The last hit had really done a number on him, but he was still standing. Chris looked at Kevin, surprised. He hadn't expected the kid to still be standing after that last blow. The kid was holding on better than he expected. Roman watched, his expression thoughtful. Kevin was no match for Chris at all. His body couldn't keep up with Roman's commands, but Kevin, despite the blood and pain, found himself smiling. This situation, it was kind of, Roman's lips curled into a slight smile. Amusing? Yeah, that was one way to put it. He was actually enjoying this. Someone was watching, clearly impressed. To them, young Master Roman was all-powerful. It was like he could see everything. The observer continued, noting that even though Chris was a 2-star knight, his movements were exactly as Roman had instructed. It was like Roman was controlling him. Chris was getting frustrated. He knew what to do, but his body just wouldn't cooperate. If he could just move the way Roman told him to, he'd already have won. The unseen observer doubled down, saying that Roman was just toying with Chris. It was like Roman was controlling him like a puppet on strings. Suddenly, Roman's voice cut through the air, telling Kevin to turn his body to the right. Kevin tensed, preparing to follow the new command. Chris followed Roman's instructions and charged forward to counterattack. He moved exactly as he was told, hoping to finally gain the upper hand. Kevin blocked Chris's attack with a loud clang. The force of the impact vibrated through his arms, but he held his ground. Chris was trying to strike Kevin down, but he kept narrowly avoiding critical moments and even counterattacking. He thought to himself, is it just a coincidence? The unseen observer was completely stunned. Even Chris, who's considered Dimitri's greatest genius, couldn't hold a candle to young Master Roman's true skills. This was young Master Roman's level. The observer vowed to forever serve Roman as their lord. Even if it was something that didn't logically make sense, they would blindly follow his words. The grip tightened on the sword, knuckles turning white. The fighter was determined to become a weapon for his master, and he knew that there was only one way to achieve it. Kevin raised his sword high, his face contorted in a scream. He roared that his willpower alone would carry him through. Blood dripped from his teeth, a testament to the brutal fight. The air was thick with the metallic scent of his own blood. Chris stared down at Kevin, his eyes cold and hard. He warned him that if he planned to keep fighting, he should be prepared for one of his body parts to be deformed. Roman chuckled, a sinister sound that sent chills down Flora's spine. She looked up at him, her face pale with shock, as she realized the true extent of his ruthlessness. Kevin stood there, blood dripping from his face, but he refused to back down. He declared that they would do this until the end. Chris looked absolutely furious. He called Kevin insignificant. Chris stomped his foot, ready to attack. He said if that was really Kevin's intent, then so be it. Chris raised his sword, ready to strike. He promised to give Kevin what he wanted. Chris warned Kevin that from now on, every time he looked at his deformed arm, he would regret this moment. The air was thick with tension as Chris prepared to strike. Kevin took a step forward, his foot hitting the ground with a thud. He was determined to keep going, no matter what. Kevin stepped forward, ready to fight. Chris stood in front of him, waiting for Kevin's next move. Kevin prepared to attack with everything he had. Blood dripped from his mouth as he focused on Chris. Kevin swung his wooden sword with all his might. The force of the blow echoed in the training area. To think Kevin would step forward like that, Chris wasn't done yet. Meanwhile, Roman watched with a keen eye. Kevin turned around, his expression determined. He gripped his wooden sword tightly, ready to follow Roman's instructions. Kevin didn't waste a second. He moved to attack Chris, swinging his sword down with all his might. Chris blocked the blow, the force of the impact shaking his arms. The two young men continued their spar. The sound of wood hitting wood echoed through the training grounds as they exchanged blows. Chris scoffed, a smug look on his face. "You think I'd get hit by that kind of large and slow attack?" he said. He thought Kevin was full of openings. Suddenly, Kevin's sword connected with Chris's face. The force of the blow sent Chris stumbling backward, his eyes wide with shock. Chris's opponent let out a shout as he attacked. Chris was caught off guard, blood dripping from his face. The attack was so fast that it left a trail of blue energy behind. It was clear that this wasn't a normal fight. Roman watched the fight with a calm expression, his purple eyes never leaving Chris. Chris, on the other hand, was clearly struggling. Chris looked down, his face contorted in pain. He was breathing heavily, trying to recover. Kevin pressed his advantage, swinging his wooden sword down on Chris. The force of the blow knocked Chris to the ground. Chris's eyes burned with a fierce intensity. He was completely focused, despite the pain and the disadvantage. Kevin didn't give Chris a chance to recover. He swung his wooden sword with full force, hitting Chris hard. Chris was sent sprawling to the ground, defeated. Kevin stood over him, the victor of this exchange. Roman watched the match. His purple eyes narrowed. He had expected Chris to duck, anticipating a feint. Lying on the ground, Chris looked up, his face contorted in pain. He thought to himself, what a nasty bastard. Roman turned to Chris, who was still on the ground. He told him that he won, and as promised, he would personally teach him from the next day onward if Chris wanted. It was all up to him, Roman said. Kevin was carrying Chris, as Roman reiterated that it was Chris's choice. The decision of whether or not to continue training was entirely up to him. Chris was now in bed, staring up at the ceiling. He sighed, exhausted from the fight. Chris stood up and looked around his room, deep in thought. He wondered why he had decided to fight in the first place. Chris frowned, realizing he had nothing to gain from winning the fight. Not only had he wasted his time, but he had even lost in the end. He looked absolutely furious with himself. Chris stared at Kevin. That last move of Kevin's. It felt familiar. It was the same situation he was in when he sparred with Roman, he realized. The day he had gone over hundreds of times in his mind. If Chris hadn't had that experience with Roman, he wondered if he could have defeated Kevin without using aura. Chris started to laugh. He couldn't believe it. Had he really grown from just that one experience? Chris wondered. The castle loomed in the background as the question hung in the air. So what will you do? Chris paused, considering his response. He seemed unsure of himself for a moment. Chris finally spoke, his voice firm. He didn't need any teachings, he declared. He would find a way to get stronger by following Roman. Chris looked back on the spar with Kevin. Every single one of Kevin's decisions was right for the situation, he realized. He had thought that Roman hadn't given Kevin any instructions, but he was wrong. Just from trying to understand Roman's decisions, Chris realized his mind was filled with teachings. Now that he thought about it, it felt like Roman was telling him things as he was teaching Kevin. Chris was stunned. Roman. No, the young master was no longer the loser he once knew. Something had changed, and it was big. Chris continued, admitting he didn't know what had happened to Roman, but the young master had reached a level that even Captain Jonathan couldn't touch, he thought. He understood now that Roman meant for him to learn by watching. Chris looked determined. If that was the case, he thought, then until he surpassed Roman, he would watch and learn everything. Roman watched Chris, a slight smile forming on his face. He seemed pleased with Chris's decision. Roman spoke, his purple eyes gleaming. Well then, he said, let's keep training. A week went by in a flash. The castle stood tall, awaiting whatever was coming next. The day of the social gathering party, hosted by the Barcos, had finally arrived. The castle was ready for a week before the social gathering party. The air was thick with anticipation. Whispers filled the air, secrets and rumors swirling like dust devils. Someone asked if the other had heard the latest gossip. About what? Came the reply. The answer came quickly. It was about Roman Dmitri. The news spread like wildfire. Roman Dmitri's engagement with the Lawrence family had been called off. The two men sat at the table, deep in conversation. One said that the announcement blamed Flora Lawrence for the broken engagement, but the other scoffed. He thought it was just an excuse to protect the Viscount's precious daughter. The man's words hung in the air, dripping with disdain. He was talking about Roman Dmitri, the so-called moron Dmitri. Elsewhere, a woman sipped her tea, listening intently. She said that breaking off the engagement so close to the war with Barco meant the eldest son of Dmitri was even worse than she'd heard. A sudden rumor broke through the negativity. Someone had heard that Roman had even taken down Bloodfang, which was hard to believe. One of the women scoffed, telling the other to give her a break. She said that the rumor was probably just a way for the Dmitri family to save face after the broken engagement. The sound echoed through the room, a loud, drawn-out noise that seemed to fill every corner. The fancy decorations did nothing to soften the noise. The news hit hard. Someone exclaimed that they couldn't believe Roman actually broke off the engagement. The document in their hand seemed to confirm it. Another voice chimed in, saying Roman was so easy to manipulate. It seemed like they thought they knew him well. The man asked if Roman was confirmed to participate in the upcoming party. The servant confirmed that they'd received a letter of participation from Dmitri, so it was official. The man holding the glass smiled, clearly pleased. Everything was going smoothly, just as he'd planned. So, the next player entered the stage. It was Anthony Barco, the eldest son of Viscount Barco. Anthony Barco took a sip from his glass, a smirk playing on his lips. He said he was looking forward to next week. Anthony was really excited. He hadn't been this hyped for a party in a long time. The day of the social party finally arrived. The sky was clear, and the castle looked grand. Back at the Dmitri estate, Roman was in thought. He was thinking about Hans. Roman looked at the outfit with a raised eyebrow. Am I really supposed to to wear this? He wondered. It was quite the sight. The outfit practically sparkled, with gold trim and a huge seashell-looking thing around the neck. The attendant gestured dramatically at the clothes. "This is your first official gathering since your disengagement," he said. "I cannot let you wear just anything." Roman's attendant continued, explaining the situation. "For your information, to give a short explanation about these clothes, an abhorrent amount of money was spent just to create these clothes." The attendant leaned in, his voice full of conviction. "But I'm sure that you wouldn't not wear this masterpiece," he said, pointing at Roman. The attendant's eyes grew wide, practically vibrating with excitement. He was talking about the outfit, the one he'd poured his entire being into. The attendant's face was flushed with pride, like a kid showing off his best drawing. He was really proud of that outfit. Roman just smirked, clearly amused by the attendant's over-the-top reaction. He looked like he was about to burst out laughing. Roman sighed, giving in. "All right, I'll wear it," he said. The attendant was already celebrating, saying he knew Roman would. Roman started walking, each step echoing in the room. He mumbled to himself, clearly not thrilled about the situation. Someone was getting impatient. "Why is he so late?" they asked, clearly annoyed. The armored man leaned against the carriage, his expression grim. "The young master will arrive first at this rate," he muttered, clearly frustrated. A figure in armor came rushing up to the carriage, clearly out of breath. "I'm sorry," he stammered, trying to catch his breath. He struggled to adjust his helmet, looking embarrassed. "I'm still not used to putting on armor," he explained, clearly flustered by his tardiness. He fidgeted with the helmet, sweat beading on his forehead. He felt awkward and out of place, not quite used to the heavy armor. Chris looked down, sighing deeply. Why do you look like that?" Roman asked, clearly not impressed. Chris stammered nervously. There wasn't any armor that fit me, even in the smithy." Even with the young master's help, it was clear Chris was still struggling. The clash of wooden swords echoed in the training yard. Chris was pushing himself harder than ever, determined to get stronger. Chris couldn't believe he had almost lost to someone like Kevin. He was determined to never let that happen again. Roman glanced back at Chris, still looking annoyed. Chris fidgeted with the helmet, sighing in frustration. A stern voice cut through the air, demanding attention. "Listen well." Chris looked up, listening intently. He knew that whatever was about to be said was important. The voice continued, explaining their responsibility. They were both escorts to their lord, and the very face of Dmitri. The Dmitri crest appeared, a symbol of the family's honor and the weight of their expectations. The voice warned that their actions held immense weight. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that Roman's reputation rested on their shoulders, so rash decisions were forbidden, and they had to be careful about what they said. Chris stood at attention, his eyes wide with determination. He replied that he would keep everything in mind. Chris's voice rang out, calling Roman Sir Knight with clear respect. Roman's expression softened slightly. Roman nodded, telling Chris that he could ask him if he was unsure about anything. He thanked Chris for his dedication. Roman pointed at Chris's helmet, telling him it was crooked again. It was a small thing, but he wanted everything to be perfect. The castle loomed in the distance, a grand structure against the bright sky. It was time to head to the party at the Barcos. The tables were piled high with every kind of food imaginable. It was clear that the Barco family was trying to impress everyone. The party was just getting started, and the guests were already laughing and talking. It was the kind of scene where everyone was trying to look their best. A group of noble ladies had gathered to trade rumors. They seemed surprised about something. The rumors started to spread quickly. Someone asked if it was true that Roman Dmitri was coming to the party today. Another voice chimed in, expressing disbelief. They couldn't believe Roman was actually going to show up at the Barcos party. The nobles couldn't believe Roman Dmitri would break off a political marriage that he himself pushed for, especially knowing Barco was interested in the Lawrence family. They wondered what he was thinking. One of the noble women said, "That's why people call Roman a moron. If he had any brains, he would have stuck with either the Barco or Lawrence family, but he messed it all up." The nobles continued, saying the Dmitri family's position had become quite ambiguous because of Roman. Even though Dmitri was the powerhouse of the Northeast, it was a bit greedy of them to want to maintain their relationship with Barco still. Another noble laughed, saying that at least Roman was participating to make up for his mistake. He thought Roman was a funny lad. Meanwhile, Flora Lawrence stood alone, watching the other nobles. She seemed lost in thought, far away from the laughter and chatter. The question lingered in the air, thick with curiosity and a hint of malice. What kind of man was Roman Dmitri? Really? One of the nobles, a man with reddish hair, said that Roman Dmitri left a terrible first impression. He added that Roman wasn't much to look at because of his small size. Flora Lawrence listened, her expression unreadable. The noble with green hair chimed in, scoffing at how Roman put on airs about being the eldest son of Dmitri. He went as far as to say that even he would have broken off the marriage if he were a woman. Flora Lawrence just listened, her eyes narrowing slightly. Suddenly, a man cleared his throat loudly. The sound cut through the gossip like a knife. The nobles fell silent, realizing they had been overheard. The man's words hung in the air, a clear reminder of Roman's status. The eldest son of Dmitri. The nobles turned their heads, surprised by the sudden announcement. One of them even blurted out, "What?" The announcement echoed through the hall, declaring, "Roman Dmitri is entering." A polished boot stepped confidently onto the carpet. The sound was sharp and clear, cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. Roman's face came into view, a slight smile playing on his lips. His purple eyes seemed to gleam with an unknown amusement. Roman walked into the party, his presence immediately drawing everyone's attention. The nobles stared, their expressions a mix of shock and curiosity. The nobles whispered among themselves, their voices laced with disbelief. One of them asked in shock, "That's Roman Dmitri?" Another noble stared at Roman's back, his voice rising in disbelief. "He's way too different from before. This is absolutely not possible. He used to be shorter than me." Someone else chimed in, focusing on a different detail. What happened to his hair? The blonde noblewoman watched Roman, her expression thoughtful. She seemed to be assessing him from head to toe, trying to reconcile the rumors with the man standing before them. The entire room seemed to hold its breath, every eye fixed on Roman. The air crackled with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension, as if they were all waiting for a storm to break. Roman Dmitri turned to face the newcomer, his expression carefully neutral. He inclined his head slightly, stating, "It's an honor to meet you." A blonde woman in a blue dress stepped forward, smiling gently. "I am Sophia of the Grizel family," she announced. Sophia continued, "You've probably never heard of our family. Though we are not a prominent family, my father, Baron Grizel, dedicates his life to the kingdom of Cairo." Roman's eyes widened slightly, clearly surprised by her assumption. "I am well aware of the Grizel family," he responded. Sophia looked at him, shocked. "Huh? You really know of Grizel?" Roman Dmitri's expression turned serious. "How could I not know a family with a history dating back centuries?" Roman smiled, a strange glint in his eyes. He looked like he was planning something big, something that wasn't going to be good for anyone else. A voice echoed in the room, presenting the information. "Here is the information of all the northeastern families, as you've requested." Roman stood at the desk, looking over the documents. Another man stood nearby, watching him with concern. The man asked suspiciously, "But why are you going through these all of a sudden?" Roman replied, "Since I am participating as the representative of my family, I should at least be equipped with the minimum amount of courtesy." He knew he had to memorize where everyone he was going to meet came from, as well as their family history. It was a daunting task, but he was determined to do it. Turns out, a lot of effort was required to win the favor of others. He knew that if he wanted to succeed, he couldn't just rely on his family name. That stood true especially for him, the one called the moron of Dmitri. He knew he had a lot to prove, and he wasn't going to let anyone down. Roman asked if she wasn't from the family that had lived in the Northeast for a long time. He added that the lumber from Griffin was famous for its high quality in the kingdom of Cairo. Then, he mentioned that he'd heard that her sibling succeeded in sensing mana. Roman sincerely congratulated her sibling's accomplishment. He hoped that this would be enough to get on her good side. Roman was in the middle of talking with Flora. The party was filled with nobles, all eager to make connections and improve their position. Suddenly, two men looked shocked by something. One of them muttered, "What the hell?" A man approached Roman, bowing slightly. He announced, "Greetings, Lord Roman Dmitri. My name is Magna of the Volt family." Roman smiled at Magna. "Oh, I get to meet the eldest son of Volt like this," he said with a hint of amusement. Magna continued, trying to impress Roman. "Hadn't Viscount Volt raised remarkable accomplishments in the past battle? I was very moved while reading about it." The man looked surprised by something Roman said. He asked, "Shall we go too? I'm thankful that you think so." Eris approached Roman, a gentle smile on her face. "It's been a while, Lord Roman. You've changed so much." Roman smiled back. "Compared to me, you're as beautiful as always, Lady Eris." Eris continued, "Is your mother well? I'd heard that she's been unwell recently." Dmitri had received many benefits from our deal with the hero's family about 10 years ago. Roman gave a slight bow. "I am also thankful for the goodwill that you've shown us," he said sincerely. Around them, the nobles whispered amongst themselves, their eyes darting back and forth between Roman and Eris. The air was thick with curiosity and speculation. The noble chuckled, admitting, "It seems that I've seen you in the wrong light until now, Lord Roman. I always thought you were difficult to talk to because you were drunk." He paused, adding, "Oh my, I was thinking of starting to drink for real, but it looks like I'll have to abstain myself. The sound of laughter echoed through the room. An old man approached Roman, interrupting the conversation. Lord Roman, he said urgently. The old man continued. The young master has invited you into the back room. Roman's eyes narrowed, a dangerous glint appearing in them. He thought to himself, I guess it's time for me to find out who's getting on my nerves. The sky shimmered with an unnatural light. It was almost blinding. The Barco family's castle loomed ahead, its walls buzzing with activity. Knights stood guard, their armor gleaming in the sunlight. One of the knights muttered that the other families were arriving with their own knight escorts. He seemed a bit envious. Another knight suddenly piped up, asking what a social party even was. He sounded genuinely curious. The first knight sighed, telling him that they would never get a chance to go inside. He quickly added that the other knight's helmet was crooked again. Roman told Chris to just take the helmet off, saying it was too big. Chris seemed unsure, stammering and asking why. Someone nearby whispered, wondering what was up with Chris. Another person remarked that Chris was Roman Dimitri's escort. Roman repeated his demand, telling Chris to take it off. Chris still seemed hesitant. Someone else nearby scoffed, saying what a joke this all was. Nearby, someone whispered that they'd heard Roman Dimitri was the abandoned eldest son. They couldn't believe he'd brought someone who couldn't even hold a sword properly as an escort. Just ignore them, the person scoffed. Another voice chimed in, asking what anyone expected from Roman. A third person finished the thought, stating flatly that this was the level of Roman stood there, holding his drink, trying to figure out what was going on. It was hard to get a grasp on the situation with so many people around. Nearby, a group of women whispered to each other, their faces lit with excitement. They seemed to be talking about Roman, but it was hard to tell for sure. Flora smiled, her eyes sparkling with amusement. She seemed to be enjoying whatever was happening. Suddenly, Anthony put his arm around Roman, pulling him closer. Anthony asked Roman who he was staring at so intently. Anthony asked Roman if he knew who the blonde lady over there was. He seemed surprised when Roman didn't know. Flora stood there, surrounded by flowers, smiling brightly. It was a beautiful sight, and for a second, the tension in the room seemed to fade. Roman thought about Flora Lawrence. He was trying to piece together what he knew about her. Suddenly, someone called out, "Over here, Roman." Anthony asked, "What happened to you in the time I didn't see you?" He looked genuinely surprised. Roman thought to himself, so this guy is Anthony Barco. Anthony looked Roman up and down. "I'd heard you've changed, but I can't believe you changed this much," he said, clearly surprised. Anthony gestured to a chair. "Have a seat and tell me everything," he urged, his eyes full of curiosity. Roman glanced at the table. Glasses were scattered around, and bits of food were left on a plate. "There are traces of people being in here." Roman noticed a tipped-over bottle near the table. The fact that he made them leave before I arrived means Roman's mind raced. He realized Anthony probably had something secret to tell him. This was going to be interesting. Anthony's smile widened, but there was something unsettling about it. "If that's the case, then I'll make him comfortable," he said, the words hanging in the air. Roman frowned, considering Anthony's words. He wasn't quite sure either what was going on. Roman sat down, placing a tray on the table. "I used to splurge tons of money to change myself, but now I keep changing day by day, even when I don't do anything," he said, a bit surprised by it all. Roman smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "In any case, it's good to see you again," he said, trying to keep things civil. Chris watched the exchange between Roman and Anthony, his expression unreadable. He was waiting for something to happen. Anthony leaned back on the couch, a strange look in his eyes. "I guess I can take that in a positive way. Honestly, I didn't know what you were thinking back then," he said, trying to sound understanding. Roman held up his wine glass. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Back then?" he asked, a hint of suspicion coloring his tone. Anthony's voice dripped with venom as he revealed the details. He said that Roman, who had been pushing for a political marriage with the Lawrence family, had been caught sleeping with Anthony's cousin in the back room. Roman's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. "Really? Wow," he said, trying to process the accusation. Anthony shook his head, a look of disbelief on his face. He couldn't believe Roman had gone so far, especially with his marriage coming up so soon, even if secrets were safe at the party. Anthony pressed his advantage, trying to corner Roman. He figured he could use the party as leverage. He asked if he could take Roman's participation in the party as confirmation that he accepted his proposal. Anthony leaned forward, trying to appear reasonable. He said he would keep the whole matter a secret. He was willing to bury the hatchet if Roman played along. Anthony's smile was wide, but his eyes were cold. He suggested they discuss Roman's marriage with the Barco family. He was really pushing for this alliance. Roman's face was a mask of surprise. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Marriage with the Barco family?" he asked, clearly shocked. Roman's eyes widened, a storm brewing within them. He realized how deep this whole thing went. This wasn't just about some petty feud. It was about power, alliances, and the future of his family. A thought echoed in Roman's head. This memory. He took a deep breath, the cold rain soaking into his clothes. He was back at the start, standing before those doors. He remembered betraying Anthony Barco. It was a decision that still haunted him. He recalled begging his father to set up a political marriage with the Lawrence family. He had been desperate. Roman knew he couldn't avoid them forever. The past was catching up to him. Roman was determined to use this chance to make things right with the Barco family. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he had to try. He walked into the room, and Anthony Barco immediately snapped at him. "You're late, Roman," he said, waving him over to the sofa. "Hurry up and take a seat." Anthony gestured towards the woman beside him. "Let me introduce you. This is my cousin, Emily Barco." Emily smiled politely. "It's nice to meet you, Lord Roman," she said. Roman gave a slight nod, still processing everything. "I'm Roman," he replied, keeping his voice even. Anthony leaned back, a sly look on his face. "You're okay with her drinking with us, right?" he asked, waiting for Roman's reaction. Anthony leaned back on the sofa, gesturing towards Emily. He mentioned that she was just walking around by herself, since it was her first time at the Barco estate. A voice echoed, confirming Emily's place in the family. Of course, she was part of the Barco family. Anthony then ordered Emily to pour Roman a drink, but quickly changed his mind. "No, it's fine. I'll pour it myself," he said, grabbing the bottle. The air suddenly thickened with unspoken anger. Someone muttered under their breath, calling Anthony a bastard. Anthony smirked, his eyes glinting with malice. "Are you showing off that you're getting married?" he asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Anthony waved his hand dismissively. "About that. Don't worry about it," he said, brushing off whatever he had been talking about before. The words hung in the air like a declaration of war. The Barco family didn't care about the Lawrence family anymore. It was clear. Roman looked surprised. "Really?" he asked, his eyes widening slightly. Anthony laughed, trying to lighten the mood. Yeah, so don't be so stiff. Drink to your heart's content." Roman didn't say anything. He just raised his glass and took a long drink, his expression unreadable. His head was pounding. He could barely make out the blurry shape of a picture frame on the floor. This wasn't right. Where was he? Everything spun out of control. He felt like he was falling, tumbling into an endless darkness. Slowly, a flicker of recognition. Something wasn't adding up. He opened his eyes and saw two people in the bed, under the covers. He was in a room he didn't recognize. Roman sat up, his heart pounding. "No way. What the hell is going on here?" he muttered, completely lost. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the room, calling out, "Roman!" Roman gasped, his eyes widening as he sat up in the bed, completely exposed. Anthony's face was twisted in disbelief and rage. "Anthony?" he shouted. Anthony demanded, What the hell have you done?" Roman's eyes darted around, filled with panic. No. Roman's head throbbed as he tried to focus. This is, he stammered, completely disoriented. His thoughts were a jumbled mess. He tried to piece together the events that led to this, but his mind was blank. "I can't remember," a voice cut through the fog in his mind, clear and commanding. "Listen carefully, Roman." Anthony's voice was cold as he continued. "It's none of my business who you sleep with." Anthony's voice echoed in the room, the words hanging heavy in the air. He accused Roman of laying hands on a lady of the Barco family. Roman remained silent, his head bowed, as Anthony continued. He made it clear that he couldn't just ignore what had happened. Anthony leaned forward, his expression unreadable in the dim light. He told Roman that he would give him a choice. Anthony explained the first option. He could expose the truth, leading to Roman's one-sided disengagement. Anthony revealed the alternative, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Roman could marry a direct descendant of the Barco family to restore their relationship. Anthony's smile was wide, but it didn't reach his eyes. He said that he was filled with rage because of what Roman had done, but he would forgive him if Roman became a man of Barco. A heavy silence filled the room. The rain outside continued to pour. Roman sat at the table, the light from the candle flickering in his eyes. He looked completely shocked by the offer. The question hung in the air, demanding an answer. Roman sat there, his face unreadable. He had a huge decision to make, and the fate of his family might depend on it. Roman's eyes narrowed as the pieces clicked into place in his mind. He finally understood what was going on. The full picture was now clear. Every detail, every conversation suddenly made sense. If Roman messed this up, if he even laid a hand on a Barco family member, the consequences would be severe. The honor of the Dmitri family would sink to rock bottom. Everything he had worked for would be for nothing. The speaker's face was red with anger as he said they were already getting trashed for not being real nobles. This marriage falling apart would only make things worse. It was clear that Roman was trapped. He probably didn't have the insides to face his father's anger. the old man would be absolutely furious. The air was thick with unspoken tension. Everyone was waiting to see what Roman would do next. Even so, he couldn't choose the other option either. The thing is, he really loved Flora. He must not have wanted to ruin the marriage that he had set up himself. That would make things even worse. And he definitely didn't want to ruin Flora's name in the process. That would be a total disaster for everyone. Roman looked down, the weight of everything crashing down on him. He had committed suicide when it was time to make his decision, a final act of desperation. He wished that his death would solve everything, a desperate hope in his final moments. He thought that this was the only way. Roman took a drink of the wine, the taste bitter on his tongue. He was a weak man, someone who'd never accomplished anything with his own strength, a pathetic excuse for a noble. How miserable. And the thought hung in the air, a heavy weight pressing down on him. Pathetic. That was the word that echoed in his mind, the final judgment on his life. Roman stared ahead, his expression unreadable. He was clearly thinking hard about what he should do. Anthony leaned forward, a serious look on his face. Why are you hesitating, Roman? The union of our two families is something that will flip the entire northeastern region on its head. Anthony's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. No one will be able to oppose us, he said, his voice full of confidence. Anthony continued to lay it on thick, trying to sell him on the idea. And you will wield absolute power in the Northeast. There's no reason for you to be just for that. Anthony's eye twitched slightly, a sign that his patience was wearing thin. He was starting to get annoyed. Roman's mind raced, trying to process what he was hearing. He could only manage to ask, what? Anthony set his wine glass down hard, the sound echoing in the room. He stared at Roman intensely. I have to accept this political marriage for such a reason. Anthony tried to brush it off, his voice smooth. You must be misunderstanding something. Anthony pointed a finger at Roman, his expression hardening. This is not a choice. Anthony's voice dripped with menace. If you refuse, I will expose what happened in the back room to the world. What do you think will happen to the Dmitri family's reputation? Anthony leaned in, his voice low and menacing. He warned Roman to think very carefully if he didn't want to live a life with his head hung low. Anthony's eyes narrowed, boring into Roman with a cold intensity. He was dead serious. Roman crossed his arms, his voice firm as he spoke. How many times did he have to say it? The Dmitri family had no need to accept the Barco family's proposal. The words hung in the air, heavy with Roman's disdain. He thought the reason for all this was pathetic. Meanwhile, back at the party, two ladies whispered to each other, their eyes darting towards Roman and Anthony. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Flora watched Roman, a smile playing on her lips. She seemed to be enjoying the party. Suddenly, Flora called out, Roman! Flora looked concerned. She asked him where he had been. Roman replied that he just had something to attend to. He said that he would have to leave because of it, cutting off Flora's protest that it hadn't been long since the party started. Flora looked disappointed, saying that it was urgent. She told Lord Roman she still had so much she wanted to talk about, and that it was a shame he had to go. Roman said that he felt the same way. He suggested that they talk again when they had the chance. Roman turned and walked away, leaving the Barco family's castle. A man in a suit bowed deeply as he left. Suddenly, Roman's expression twisted into fury. He demanded that someone take back what they had said, recognizing that voice. The room went silent as everyone turned to stare at Roman. The guards looked stunned by his sudden outburst. Roman's eyes narrowed, filled with intense anger. He was ready to explode. The blade pierced straight through the armored foot with a sickening thud. The force of the blow echoed through the hall. Someone screamed, calling out, Kevin! Kevin was on the ground, surrounded by armored knights. Chris stood among them, looking down at him with a cold expression.